as if the darkness itself allowed their desires to intertwine. The girl with jet black hair looked into the boy's eyes and whispered that she wanted him to be only hers and no one else's. The guy in the elegant tailcoat, a little embarrassed, cast a glance at her, full of uncertainty, but deep down, smoldering interest. The girl smiled slightly, watching the Duke's son, as if she couldn't believe that she, a simple peasant, had found herself so close to high society. And suddenly, without saying a word, he carefully took her face in his hands and, holding his breath, kissed her, as if the world had stopped at that moment. She sat on the bed in his arms and painfully realized that this was their last meeting, and soon he would leave her life forever. The guy, looking down and hiding his excitement, carefully took her hand and asked if she had gotten tired of him after all this time spent together. Suddenly, breaking the silence, he clapped his hands with desperate sincerity and begged his lady not to leave him alone. The girl froze in place, not knowing what to answer. Her lips trembled, because she had to leave soon, and he had just confessed his love. The men formally congratulated her on successfully passing all her exams and escorted the student, proudly advancing her to the next level. The boys were genuinely curious as to why the girl from the club had decided to join them, so they huddled in the narrow corridor, talking. The boys discussed how servants were usually quick to back out, and perhaps she was a new transfer who had missed the application deadline. One of the boys, with blonde hair, grinning evilly, asked sarcastically that if she was so smart, then how could she have made such a gross mistake? But suddenly, while they continued to mock, another guy behind them gave a sharp cry and almost fell over, as if something had stunned him to the depths of his soul. He screamed, asking for forgiveness from an invisible interlocutor, loudly repenting for the blow he had once inflicted on the man standing in front of him. The students froze in horror, their gaze turning forward to where someone so powerful stood that his mere presence inspired fear. Another student, covered in bruises from the beating, was shivering on the cold floor, his eyes filled with terror and his body shaking with silent fear. All the students flinched when a stern male voice sounded behind them, demanding to know the name of the new girl who had recently transferred. Before them stood a tall, cold-eyed youth wearing an academy uniform with steel-colored hair and a face that looked like it was carved from marble. Arena Academy was considered the only educational institution in the country where your social status had absolutely no meaning. It didn't matter who you were, the son of an aristocrat or a peasant woman. You could only get in by passing the entrance exams with the highest score. The Academy's students were renowned for their unique talents. Some excelled in science, others in singing, art, or martial arts. Particular attention was paid to club activities here, and every student was required to join at least one of the many clubs. A new student named Lean passed her entrance exams with flying colors and immediately attracted attention within the walls of the prestigious academy. Lean was a young beauty with black hair, long eyelashes, and a pretty face, as if she had stepped out of an old fairy tale. Now she wandered uncertainly around the building, trying to find a club to join. One of the options turned out to be a mosquito torture club. However, that club seemed strange and repulsive to her, and the next one, a tasting club, completely scared her off with a frightening poster on the stand. A sudden loud sound somewhere behind her made Leanne flinch in fright and clumsily hit her forehead against the notice board by the wall. Under the gaze of other students, the girl worried that she might have missed the application deadline, and now she wouldn't be accepted anywhere. Gritting her teeth in tension, Leanne was afraid that she would get low grades and would simply be kicked out of the academy as a failure. Raising her head, she noticed a dent on her forehead from a recent blow and hurried to pull herself together to look confident and cool in the eyes of others. Turning on her heels, she, ignoring the glances of strangers, headed towards the exit to get some fresh air. Behind her, the other boys continued to discuss the new girl, chuckling maliciously, as if her very presence was irritating. On the street, the girl froze, the wind blowing her dark hair, and in that moment, she felt vulnerable, but still standing, proudly. She was afraid that she would never be able to fit into the group, because the others had known each other for a long time, since elementary school. Suddenly, someone's warm hand gently touched her shoulder from behind, and a voice was heard behind her, addressing her directly by name. Lean flinched in surprise, but was even more surprised when she saw a young blonde man in front of her, who was also frightened by her reaction. Sinking to the floor after the unexpected collision, she slowly turned her head and met the gaze of the young man who knew her name and was clearly looking for her. Lean recoiled, frightened, lying that she was not at all the one he was looking for. And upon hearing this, the guy instantly became upset and dejected. Frowning slightly and now with greater caution, the girl nevertheless asked why he was looking for Lian at all and what he wanted from her. The student suddenly rushed away, continuing to shout in her direction, demanding an explanation of what had happened that was so important and why he had to look for her. Lian, smiling and sticking out her tongue in response to his rudeness, thought that he was just stupid since he didn't notice her name tag hanging on her chest. After that, she took a couple of confident steps forward, trying to ignore the noise behind her and maintain her calm and dignity. However, Lian became curious about who was so diligently searching for her among hundreds of students, because she had never known anyone here before and felt like an outsider. Meanwhile, the guy in the strict blue uniform continued to follow her trail, not lagging behind, as if he was not going to give up until he found her. Behind them loomed the academy building, its high walls seeming to provide both reliable protection and a rigorous test for newcomers. Lian lowered her head in disappointment as she still couldn't find the club she wanted to join, when suddenly a young man with red hair appeared behind her. Suddenly he smiled broadly when he noticed her, and said with relief that he had finally been able to find the one he was looking for among the many strangers and noisy corridors. Lean narrowed her eyes in surprise and was surprised to hear the stranger invite her to join his club, which, as it turned out, was quite good. The beauty instantly turned around in shock, hearing the unexpected proposal, which caught her off guard and caused a slight excitement inside. This young man had soft, flame-like red hair, with a warm tint that gave him a special charm and mystery in Lean's eyes. His clear, shining gray eyes looked straight at her, reflecting a confidence and slight playfulness that was hard to miss. The young man's well-defined lips were full and large, and the smile he gave her seemed genuine and seemed to warm her heart. Smiling, he invited Lian to write her name on the application form, thereby opening the door to a new world and new opportunities for her. Lian blushed at the young man's beauty and charisma and felt her heart beat faster. He literally radiated light and energy around him. The red-haired scientist continued to persistently approach Lian, inviting her to join his club, as if not noticing her obvious irritation. Annoyed and wary, Lian turned to him, folding her arms across her chest, and asked if the application deadline for new club members had passed yet. The guy, surprised by her answer, froze in place, not knowing how to properly respond to her question and the growing confidence in her voice. But a moment later, he smiled again and said that tomorrow there would be a club meeting where she could find out everything and decide whether to join. Ignoring her skepticism, the guy interrupted her, stating that today was the deadline for applications, and luckily she had already submitted her application. He recoiled in fear when Lian decided not to sign any papers, surprised and not understanding how this was even possible. He wouldn't let her leave, persistently asking why she refused to join his club, and began to persistently pursue her down the hallway. Ahead of her, the academy building loomed, constructed of cold gray stone, seeming unwavering and stern in contrast to her worries. He tapped the paper with his finger, explaining that without her name here, the application was not considered complete, and the club would not be able to accept her as a participant. Confused, Lian hesitated, realizing that each club had a different application deadline, something she had never known or expected before. Placing her fingers on her forehead, the girl considered that perhaps it would be better to just go straight ahead, rather than wait and send out formal requests later. The guy who persistently clung to her was obviously popular and handsome. His smile attracted glances, which added even more insecurity to Lean. Wanting to finish her studies peacefully and not get involved with the club that was famous at school, Lean was about to refuse, but she was suddenly interrupted. Confused, the boy explained that a minimum of 3 people were needed to form a club, but right now there were only 2. They needed 1 more member. Lean froze in place, raising her hand, hesitating and not knowing whether to refuse outright, because this decision could affect her future fate. The guy looked at her with big, sad eyes, as if begging and pleading that she would still leave her name on his application form. Finally, the girl took courage and, trembling a little, wrote her name on the form, no longer able to resist his persistent requests. Embarrassed, she blushed and quickly turned away. And the boy, noticing this, smiled with joy and satisfaction, as if he had won an important battle. As if dissolved in mild surprise, Leon walked away, and the young man, smiling after her, whispered that there would be a club meeting tomorrow, and he was waiting for her there. He watched her leave for a long time with interest, holding a shiny flashlight in his hands, as if preparing for a new adventure with her in this club. Carcian spent a long time looking for more members for his club, as none of them were part of his fan club, and he needed a team to start everything from scratch. Rumors that Carcian was planning to open his own club quickly spread throughout the academy and attracted the interest of many students from different classes. Since Carcian and his friend were the strongest students in the academy, joining their club was considered a great honor for every ambitious newcomer. However, Carcian's friend complained that none of them liked to just accept someone into the club, especially if no one knew that person. When they learned that a new girl had been transferred to them who didn't know anyone there, they made a quick decision to take her into their club to support the newcomer. Carcian turned away and walked away with a confident smile, pleased that his charm had convinced Leanne to join them without any hesitation. He was surprised that she showed almost no interest in him and simply ignored him earlier, although he tried to attract her attention in every possible way. Raising his hand to his chin, Carcian thought that perhaps the girl simply had poor eyesight, since she had not noticed his attractive appearance and charisma. The young man himself knew very well that he had a beautiful face, and this was precisely what he was proud of, because it was his main weapon in communicating with others. Another day passed at the academy, and that evening a meeting of all the clubs took place, where the students discussed plans and new initiatives. Suddenly, Carcian, irritated and not hiding his displeasure, asked the girl what her eyesight was like, and whether it was really as good as she said. She calmly replied that she had excellent eyesight, even better than many others, and this left no doubt about her words. The girl sat on a chair at the table, and 2 more guys sat in front of her. Together, the 3 of them became the founders of the new club they had joined. Carcian had a terrible character, and in his soul, he bitterly wondered why she had not succumbed to the charm of his handsome face and had not paid attention to him. Rumors circulated around the academy that Carcian had once used magic to attack another student during training, adding to his reputation as a dangerous and difficult guy. Therefore, Lean came to the conclusion that this young man was not as good a guy as he seemed at first glance, and she should be more careful. Suddenly, Carcian's friend introduced himself to the girl as Fjord, a man with a gentle smile and kind eyes that immediately endeared him to Leon. He smiled kindly and politely asked if he could address her by name so as not to feel like a stranger among his new acquaintances and friends. The girl recoiled in surprise, because the young man looked at her completely differently, with interest and some kind of incomprehensible warmth in his eyes. Lean introduced herself in response, smiling, and said that it was perfectly fine for him to call her by her first name. It sounded very sweet and friendly. Folding her hands in front of her, she suddenly asked what the theme of their club was then, because she wanted to better understand where she had ended up. The slightly puzzled girl shook her head when she heard that they were essentially just relaxing together, without any clear or serious topic. Calmly and confidently, Carcian explained that they would earn points for destroying demons, and that at the club, they would simply relax and spend time together. After these words, the guy coldly ordered Leon to be quieter, because she was just a statistic to maintain the required number of club members. Fjord thought uncomfortably to himself that his friend was too cruel and straightforward, unable to show compassion even to the newcomers to the academy. Suddenly, Lian stood up unexpectedly and, without hiding her determination, walked straight towards Carcian, as if she wanted to tell him something important. Coming closer, she smiled and suddenly told him straight to his face that he was the best. Ignoring the surprised reaction of those gathered around, the young man flinched slightly when Lian came too close, and, not wanting to seem rude, he gently and carefully pushed her away from him. Carcian blushed with embarrassment and, shouting angrily, asked why she was getting so close to him and why she was behaving so strangely and provocatively. Lian raised her hands in apology and quietly said that she had not meant to offend him at all, and had no intention of creating conflict between them. However, when she said his name out loud, albeit informally, Carcian blushed even more deeply, as if it made him feel awkward and embarrassed. Embarrassed and shy, he turned away and sternly ordered her not to say his name out loud anymore, to avoid unnecessary attention. The meeting ended and Lian, without stopping, turned around and quickly walked away, trying to get away from these tense moments as quickly as possible. Understanding her confusion, Fjord approached and cautiously asked what exactly had happened, and why she had decided to leave so suddenly and without explanation. The girl turned around and explained that the red-haired boy had given her permission to rest, so she could now relax and unwind a bit. Gesturing with her hands towards 3 chairs nearby, Lian said that she was going to lie down and sleep on them, as if she already felt like a part of this place. Raising his hand to his chin, Carcian watched her intently, trying to understand her mood and reflect on his own thoughts at that moment. Lian, lying on the chairs, looked straight at him, as if expecting him to say something important or express his opinion about her actions. When she asked if he had anything to say, Carcian turned away sheepishly and briefly refused, avoiding unnecessary words and a tense look. Calmly and with a slight smile, the girl thought to herself that she had seen that he wanted to say something, but did not dare to open his thoughts out loud. Carcian said in a dark and cold voice that Lian was of no interest to him as a girl, and he did not want to waste his precious attention on her. To this, the beauty calmly and confidently replied that this did not bother her at all, and that she was not at all striving for his vain attention or recognition. The guy didn't like this unexpected answer at all, because before all the girls had been trying to win his favor, but now he closed his eyes deeply and was confused. Suddenly he stood up abruptly and irritably, and Lian calmly thought that he was clearly not the type of person who was capable of making his first sincere declaration of love. Lian gently and carefully asked the young man to lean closer to her, to whisper something quietly in his ear, as if wanting to understand his true innermost thoughts and feelings. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, a deafening noise was heard behind the closed doors, causing everyone to flinch in surprise. When the guy suddenly recoiled from her and almost lost his balance, Lian asked in amazement if Carcian was okay. The student, embarrassed by her words, sat on the floor holding his cheek and, blushing, muttered that she was behaving completely without shame. The beauty laughed at his violent reaction and, smiling, remarked that she could even feel sorry for him if he behaved more modestly. But Carcian suddenly approached, drowning out her words, covered her mouth with his hand, and did not allow her to finish, interrupting any attempt to object. After these words, with red cheeks and slightly agitated, Carcian warned her that if she said something like that again, he would make her remain silent for the rest of her studies. The girl decided to play with him a little, smiling playfully, and unexpectedly licked his hand, causing a storm of emotions and surprise in the young man. The young man shuddered and blushed even more, as if he had received a powerful shock, and this only increased his confusion and inner turmoil. Carcian's face was bright red, like a ripe tomato, and he began to stutter in embarrassment, trying to find the words to respond to her impudent act. Lian stuck her tongue out at him with a smile, playing and teasing him with her light and flirtatious behavior, enjoying the moment and his reaction. This handsome young man didn't look like a bad boy at all. he was easily embarrassed and quickly lost his confidence around her. The guy quickly retreated and recoiled, as if confused and trying to hide from her playful and unexpected attention, as if from a sudden gust of wind. Lean, looking at his hand with his tongue sticking out, smiled and said with a slight mockery that it tasted slightly salty to her, which made her feel cheerful. After that, smiling sweetly, she flirtatiously confessed to the boy that she thought his skin would be sweet and warm, like honey in a sunny meadow in May. The young man's head immediately spun with embarrassment and shyness, because she so openly and coquettishly allowed herself to make such an unexpected confession. The beauty herself seemed like a little devil who had done something naughty and cheerful, breaking the rules of normal behavior. The girl sat quietly on the chair, smiling to herself and thinking that she should tease her new acquaintance more often and observe his reactions. Their mutual friend, a blonde man, stood to the side at that time and asked in bewilderment what kind of nonsense they were both doing here, not understanding their cheerful mood. However, on the academy's premises, mentioning anyone's social status was strictly forbidden, so that all students would feel equal and protected. Leanne understood this very well, and that is why she decided to join here, to become part of this fair and free community. She noticed that the red sofa in the room at the front looked very expensive and clearly stood out from the rest of the furniture with its richness. Carcian calmly and slightly mockingly explained to her that in front of her was just an ordinary sofa, as if hinting that she was being too surprised and seemed stupid. The girl clarified that she meant the symbol on the golden fabric that was carefully draped over the furniture, giving it a special and sophisticated look. She felt a little awkward and uncomfortable as she realized that her question might seem unintelligent for an aristocrat of high status. Taking a cup of tea, Carzian explained that such a sofa is much better and more comfortable than the usual wooden chairs most often found in such spaces. Resting her face on her hand, the girl began to tease Carcian again, saying that he didn't care when she sat on uncomfortable chairs and had fun. Annoyed, Carcian asked how much longer Leanne was going to tease him, clearly losing his patience and trying to maintain his composure in this game. After wiping the sweat from his face, he admitted that he didn't understand what exactly was going on in her head and why she was acting so provocatively and playfully. Suddenly, the man coldly and threateningly asked her if she would understand what he would do if he decided to literally break her head in half. However, Lean was not afraid, but simply calmly asked if he wanted to try using his power on her and check what she was really capable of. Having received a refusal, the girl quickly jumped up from her seat and ran forward with determination, as if challenging the whole world and her opponent at the same time. After this, the beauty sat down opposite the boy and calmly said that she would rather sit next to him than on the cold sofa with the golden cape. Carcian fell strangely silent, looking at her intently, and then, unable to bear it, asked what had made her sit down next to him. Finally, he asked her why she had chosen that particular seat, and she replied that the empty seat next to him was unoccupied and looked much more comfortable. She completely ignored the sofa with the gold throw, not wanting to sit there, preferring simplicity and comfort to pomp and luxury. With a slight smile on his face, Carcian admitted that he didn't think she cared about such luxury, and that she would choose a simpler but more sincere option next to him. However, Lean herself was only waiting for these words to say that she could very well use his sofa if she wanted to feel special. Sitting down on the soft and cozy furniture, the girl happily thought to herself how soft and incredibly comfortable it was, like a light, fluffy cloud. Leanne felt like she was sitting on a soft, fluffy cloud. She felt so comfortable and at ease that she almost forgot about all the worries and cares around her. Pouting and slightly offended, the girl asked the guy why he suddenly started laughing at her, as if he found something truly funny in her behavior. Laughing and smiling, Carcian asked her if she liked the sofa so much that she completely relaxed and forgot about all her daily problems. Maintaining a cool indifference, the lady replied that she didn't care at all, although it was clear from her face that she really did like the sofa. Suddenly, the young man spoke confidently, that everything was visible on her face and that she clearly enjoyed the softness and comfort of the sofa. It was simply impossible to hide it. Lean trying to relax her facial muscles and hide her slight embarrassment, decided to eat more fresh vegetables today to look and feel better. After which the girl suddenly snapped her fingers, and at that very moment the air around her seemed to sparkle, revealing an unexpected and magical light before them. Suddenly, a soft red fabric appeared in front of them, as if from thin air, as if woven from light and warmth, as if magic had come to life around them. The lady stared at the fabric in surprise, as she certainly wasn't going to cast a spell or use any magic to create something like this herself. With a slight smile on her face, she realized that this was Carcian who had done this for her, who had coldly ordered her to sleep soundly and peacefully on this cozy sofa. With a sly glint in her eyes, Lian teased him, asking what exactly he liked. The way she climbed into his ear? Or maybe her cheeky tongue and demeanor. Carcian choked on his saliva at these words, blushed and hesitated, clearly not expecting such a bold and frank joke directed at him. Covered with a warm, cozy blanket, the girl settled down comfortably and felt how everything around her became so warm and soft, as if a gentle summer evening had embraced her. Carcian resembled an irritated and suspicious cat who was distrustful and negative towards all strangers, maintaining a cold and closed gaze. When the girl sincerely apologized for not understanding everything at once, Carcian asked in surprise what exactly she meant by her strange words and misunderstandings. Lian detailed the rumors that were circulating throughout the country that he had allegedly killed people before entering the academy, causing terror and fear in everyone. As she fell asleep, the lady quietly and confidently said that these rumors were just empty fiction and complete nonsense, having no basis or meaning in real life. The academy was vast and majestic, and rumors, like dark shadows, wandered through its ancient walls, generating fear and mystery among students and teachers. The next clear and sunny day arrived, and the green trees were reflected in the high walls of the educational institution, filling the air with freshness and the whisper of leaves. Lian lay quietly on the soft sofa, slowly waking up from a deep sleep, feeling the warm, soft light gently penetrate the room, caressing her face. Suddenly, the door rang softly and faintly. Someone approached them cautiously, breaking the calm silence and causing a slight commotion among those present in the room. Fjord carefully noticed that Carcian was in no hurry to enter the room, and asked him calmly what had happened and why he was acting so strangely now. It seemed like the guy really didn't want to wake Lean, who was dozing on the cozy bed inside, trying to keep it quiet and respect her peace and sleep. Not understanding what was happening, Ford cautiously asked his friend what was wrong with him, because he had been acting very strange and withdrawn lately for no apparent reason. Carcian looked as if this new student really bothered and excited him deeply, causing him rare and unusual strong feelings. The blonde asked with slight surprise and disbelief if his withdrawn and cold friend Carcian really liked this new girl, but Carcian coldly and reservedly replied to his friend that he was helping Lian solely during the adaptation period at the academy, and nothing more. When asked how long he intended to help her, the boy calmly lowered his hand and briefly replied that he was setting aside only 1 week for this. During this week, he planned to behave carefully and discreetly with her, so that the lady would not run away prematurely until she got used to the academy. Covered with a pink fluffy blanket, Lian was in no hurry to wake up, preferring to remain in the warmth and silence, enjoying the moment of peace and comfort. The boy walked past her calmly, dressed in the elegant blue uniform of the academy, looking collected, serious, and military-like as always. Noticing her open and bare legs, he suddenly reached out without thinking and carefully grabbed her ankle, wanting to fix the fallen blanket. At that very moment, Lean woke up from the touch, opened her eyes in surprise, and immediately looked at the handsome man with a slight expression of confusion. After which, with a lazy and playful smile, she asked him why he suddenly decided to show concern and so unexpectedly covered her. Like a true knight, Carcian jerked away from her, clearly embarrassed, and began to awkwardly make excuses. But the maiden only grinned and began to tease him, calling him an angel. Fjord watched the argument between this strange couple with surprise and slight shock as they both behaved in a truly unusual and inappropriate manner. Covering her mouth with her hand, Leanne quickly said that she was just joking with him and had no intention of embarrassing him or flirting on purpose. Irritated by her unexpected compliments and completely embarrassed, the young man stomped to the side, shouting for her to sleep better and not to touch him anymore. Lean, slightly stretching forward and upward with a tired face, suddenly thought that perhaps she should just pick up a book and read it quietly. She noticed their mutual friend, a blonde man, who calmly sat down by the window and began to read a book with interest, immersing himself in the lines without distraction. It suddenly dawned on her that she didn't really know anything about this boy, even though he had always been polite, attentive, and respectful to her before. At the academy, young Fjord held a solid second place in strength, right behind the pink-haired boy who was considered the strongest mage among the students. There seemed to be no flaws in this mysterious young man, and that was why Lean suddenly wanted to joke around and play a little with him too. That is why the young lady, without losing her resolve and maintaining a dignified posture, approached the other young man, looked him in the eye, and, without hiding her purpose, asked the question, to which he immediately nodded his head in agreement. Approaching him with an elusive grace, she slowly raised her hand and gently placed it on his shoulder, after which she realized that she had not at all hoped for his sincerity, but still wanted to hear if he found the lectures in class boring. Leanne, full of grace and inner calm, stood next to another student, crossing her long legs and observing the proceedings in the classroom with the air of a refined aristocrat, as if assessing the invisible scene before her. Suddenly, without warning and with a sharp movement, as if in a dance, she deftly slid her foot and with the precision of an experienced fighter kicked the shoe off his foot, causing bewilderment among those present and a light chuckle that ran through the room. Like an arrow shot from a foot, the shoe flew through the air across the room and, describing an elegant arc, hit the wall in the opposite corner with a loud sound, leaving behind a feeling of chaos. Lean smiled slightly at the corner of her lips, clearly enjoying the result of her sudden prank, while the confused young man, not having time to comprehend anything, looked around, trying to understand what exactly had just happened. The slipper, which flew across the room with such rapid speed as if it had been driven by the wind, gave off a light steam, as if it had crossed the entire space in a fit of mischief, leaving behind a trail of surprise and barely noticeable disorder. The girl laughed with a satisfied smile, her shoulders shaking slightly with suppressed amusement, because this sudden prank was just a playful joke on another student, caused by the desire to slightly liven up the boring atmosphere of the class. Only a moment later did she feign mild remorse, apologizing for her daring joke, after which she ran after the shoe with her usual liveliness. After all, such pranks were something of amusement for her when the atmosphere became too monotonous. With his fingers, deftly and quickly, as if it were a practiced gesture, the young man picked up the shoe from the floor and looked at it with slight surprise in his eyes, as if trying to understand how such an elegant thing could become part of such a sudden performance. Without stopping for a second, the girl took the shoes from his hands and with a slight smile ran back to the familiar blonde man, intending to return his thing to him with playful solemnity, as if it were an important mission worthy of the heroine of the play. Carcion, standing a little to the side, watched the whole scene with silent jealousy, because, despite his presence, the girl did not even glance in his direction, as if his existence was completely lost against the background of her other interests. After she returned to the blonde, the girl, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, began to flirt with him, tilting her head and in a soft, slightly mocking voice, asking if he had accidentally lost his shoe in the heat of sudden events. Without unnecessary modesty, with the grace of a theatrical actress, she dropped to one knee in front of him and began to carefully, with playful care, place the shoe on his foot, as if performing a ritual that transformed a simple thing into a sign of their playful connection. Suddenly, Carcion, who had been holding back until this moment, jumped up sharply from his seat, loudly pushing his chair back, which caused general surprise. His friends, noticing the change in his behavior, froze in awkward silence, not knowing how to react to the outburst of emotions. Lean, who had not expected such a reaction, froze in the same position, confused, not taking her surprised gaze off him, trying to understand what exactly had affected the young man so much, and why such a harmless scene had caused such a violent emotional outburst in him. Carcian, barely able to cope with the surging irritation, loudly clenched his teeth. His jaw creaked painfully from the tension, and rage raged in his chest, as if jealousy, which he did not want to acknowledge, had burst out against his will. After a short silence, Carcian, not hiding the irritation in his voice, sharply and almost rudely stated that, apparently, she completely lacked such concepts as pride and conscience if she allowed herself to behave like this in front of everyone. Slightly raising an eyebrow and looking at him with genuine bewilderment, the lady asked in a restrained but clear voice why he had suddenly made such strange and, in her opinion, completely unfounded conclusions. Without taking her attentive gaze off him, turning away, Carcian explained almost through clenched teeth that he was outraged by how easily she knelt down in front of another young man, as if she didn't care who was in front of her, and ordered her to immediately stand up, not wanting to look at this scene anymore. Sweet Lin, confused, could not understand why Carcian suddenly flared up so sharply, because everything that was happening was just an innocent joke, while their mutual friend could barely contain his laughter, trying not to betray his amusement with loud laughter. They stood in a long corridor with high windows, almost reaching the ceiling, from which the light of the daytime sky poured. And in this majestic space, with a floor polished to a shine, their quarrel seemed especially strange and unnecessary, as if alien to these walls. The friends walked slowly down the spacious corridor, discussing Carcian's strange behavior among themselves, as he, in their opinion, completely unreasonably used the girl's period of adaptation to her new surroundings as a convenient excuse for his sudden outburst. At some point, Carcian stopped in place, looking down at the floor, as if he no longer knew how else to justify his own actions, searching his head for at least some words that could explain why he had behaved so irritably. Fjord, clutching his head with both hands, sighed heavily and asked his friend with annoyance to finally say what was on his mind and explain his behavior, since it had already become obvious to everyone that he was worried, but at the same time he stubbornly remained silent. Suddenly, Carcian shot him such an angry and withering look that he even recoiled, because the expression on his friend's face spoke for itself. Fjord was beginning to seriously irritate him, as if he was getting to the very core of his unwanted pain. The handsome blonde stared at his acquaintance in surprise, unable to hide his confusion, because he looked genuinely dissatisfied, and in his gaze one could sense a mixture of resentment, jealousy, and something deeper that he himself had not yet realized. After a short pause, Fjord sighed quietly, almost wearily, and, realizing that further discussion would only increase the tension, decided not to pursue the topic further, preferring to remain silent and leave his friend alone with his own thoughts. A new day was slowly dawning, and soft morning light was spilling over the majestic academy, surrounded by high spires, gardens, and marble colonnades. Another school day was beginning, full of expectations and new events. A breeze, filled with the scent of fresh leaves and slightly damp grass, flowed between the trees, bringing a sense of beginning and purity, while the birds in the treetops lazily played melodies, as if playing along with the invisible orchestra of a cheerful morning. Leon sat on a stone bench in the academy's courtyard, basking in the warm rays of the sun and allowing herself to relax a little, breathing in the cool morning air and watching the area around her come to life. With a slight sense of embarrassment and inner turmoil, she reflected on how she had recently found herself the center of attention from two of the academy's strongest students, two young men whose strength, status, and attention to her were both flattering and alarming. Even within the walls of this academy, built for knowledge and development, there was its own special secular world, filled with whispering voices, glances from under the brims of hats, and endless rumors that spread faster than any letter. Young Lien clutched her things in her lap, feeling an invisible pressure tightening inside her. She had to be careful even here, among the marble, columns, and apparent safety of the classroom. Often, other students, especially boys, would approach her and talk about her sweet face with forced smiles, as if that was all she had, without taking her seriously, as if intelligence and strength could not belong to such a graceful creature. She silently listened to the ridicule and hidden accusations directed at her, not showing how her heart was clenching inside when she was called nothing more than an insect who happened to be next to two of the strongest young men in the academy, as if she did not deserve it. Further away, in a corner of the garden, another girl was discussing her in a low voice with a boy, saying that Lien was unworthy of their attention, saying that she only had a sweet face, behind which there was no nobility, no strength, no dignity needed for the academic elite. The girl with long, carefully styled hair pointed her finger sharply at Lien, not hiding her contempt, and with a cold smile said that she was unworthy of being next to the most handsome and respected young men in the entire school. Continuing to point at her as if to show her off, she asked with pointed mockery whether Lien had realized how much below their level she was, and whether she truly understood that she had no place among those born to shine in the society of the academic elite. Their clothes and demeanor immediately made it clear that they were members of the upper class. Expensive uniforms, sparkling skin, brooches on their lapels, every detail spoke of status, grooming, and privileges that others could only dream of. But the main thing was not the gold on the chest or the impeccable posture. Their eyes, full of icy superiority, looked at Lien as if she were just a mistake in their ideal world. Something alien that violated the established hierarchical order. With a crooked, condescending smile, as if making a great discovery, the girl finally said with triumphant satisfaction that it seemed the rumors circulating around the academy were entirely true, and the sweet lady really did not deserve their attention. Suddenly, another student, unable to contain herself, shouted out defiantly, asking if this silly girl really thought she could hold the attention of handsome men forever, when in reality she was no one and stood out in no way from the others. The other students, noticing what was happening, chose to pass by without interfering in the conflict. They pretended not to notice anything, turning away from Lien, as if her loneliness and humiliation were a common occurrence and did not deserve attention. The main character, remaining seated in the same place, slowly raised her head and suddenly realized that those around her had misunderstood everything. And if they had known the whole truth, the situation would most likely have turned out even more cruelly for her. So Lien, having collected her thoughts, decided to play the role of the victim in order to avoid the worst. Hugging the things to herself with feigned sorrow in her eyes, she said with sadness in her voice that she really was unworthy of being near those young men. To the irritation and confusion of those around her, she nevertheless decided to give an explanation and said that she came to the academy not for social ambitions, but because she sincerely wanted to study, grow, understand, and become something more than just a face. The enraged girl, without hiding her anger, with a haughty expression on her face, demanded that Lien explain how she ended up in the handsome club in the first place, among those who were considered unattainable and practically perfect at the academy. Raising a light feather, as if demonstrating her composure, the beautiful maiden replied with a barely noticeable smile that it all happened by chance, because even she could not resist the faces of those two. And apparently, it was they who were the cause of the current situation. Birds circled high in the sky, smoothly cutting through the air with their wings. Trees quietly rustled their leaves in the light morning breeze. and the academy seemed to remain a silent witness to all human passions and contradictions. One of the guys standing nearby suddenly nodded with a slight grin, as if he had just seen the light, and, looking towards Lian, he silently agreed. Indeed, it would be almost impossible to refuse their sweet faces. For this, he immediately received a blow to the head from his friend, who clearly decided that he had gone too far. The enraged aristocrat, still seething with anger, continued to interrogate Lian with pressure, demanding an explanation as to why she was able to attract the attention of the school princes while she, despite her title and status, remained invisible to them. In her red-hot gaze, full of internal cracks, envy burned brightly, mixed with burning resentment, real, dull anger and hatred, which she hid behind the outer mask of arrogance, but which now surfaced. With a contemptuous smile, closing her eyes, the girl pointed her finger at Lian and, without hiding her arrogance, said that she did not care at all about the sacred rules of the academy, because even they could not protect someone who took someone else's place undeservedly. Coming almost right up to her, the evil aristocrat, looking her straight in the eyes, hissed in a choked voice that, in the end, Lian would remain only a cheap, fleeting memory for those handsome men. Something that would quickly be forgotten without a trace. After saying these words, she poked Lian in the chest with her finger, as if she wanted to leave a mark, not only physically, but also mentally, and ordered her to no longer turn up her nose, not to harbor false hopes, and to stay away from those who were always out of her reach. Lian, without blinking, accepted this gesture with cold calm, and in the depths of her soul only thought that in front of her was not an adult rival, but a capricious, envious child who had not yet learned to lose and did not know how to accept someone else's freedom of choice. Lian's childish hands clutched the school supplies pressed to her chest tighter. A light pen, a neatly bound notebook, and a notepad. As if these simple things could become a shield from the malice, envy, and senseless arrogance that surrounded her on all sides. Lian closed her eyes for a moment, took a slow breath, and then, with a fragile but firm intonation, replied that she understood everything perfectly, and then mockingly added, "Did any of them really consider themselves on the same level as the best guys in the class?" The main instigator of the conflict winced at such impudence, as if she had received a slap in the face, and with boiling anger demanded that Lian dare to repeat what she had said, but not with that cold grin, but with an apology, which, of course, did not follow. In an attempt to regain her upper hand, she proudly declared that her wealthy mother was a countess of an old family, and all the lands and gold in the neighboring regions belonged exclusively to their family. Therefore, she was the only one who had the right to stand alongside the heirs of the elite. The boys did not remain on the sidelines, and with haughty looks, they also began to boast about their origins. One proudly said that he was the son of a viscount. The second mentioned his count's title and wealth, as if nobility in itself meant strength. Lian, with a strained, almost forced smile, silently listened to the boastful speeches, tightly clutching the pen in her hand, as if this simple object could become her invisible shield and last stronghold in this cold and cruel clash of characters and statuses. The evil aristocrat, sighing with irritation and clearly drawing a profound conclusion, decided that now Lian had finally figured out her place, understood that it was not worth getting involved with them because they were invariably higher in status than her, and therefore she must humble herself and submit. With a sinister, cold grin filled with arrogant satisfaction, the girl ordered the newcomer to kneel, as if wanting to finally consolidate her superiority and humiliate the one who had not yet submitted without complaint. But Lian, not giving in to the provocation, remained standing, holding the pen in her hands with restraint, and calmly, as if performing an important ritual, asked the students present to repeat their names so that she could write them down, demonstrating her inner steely disposition and composure. The irritated girl reluctantly agreed, nodding her head, and with a contemptuous sneer asked her rival in love what she had in mind, hoping that she would slip up and make some kind of mistake that would allow her to win this verbal battle. Young Lian, as if not noticing any of the evil words or mockery around her, calmly and confidently stood up from her seat, not allowing herself a drop of doubt or fear, demonstrating that she had her own will and her own plans for this situation. After taking a deep breath and gathering her thoughts, Lian, like a brave warrior on the brink of battle, assumed a fighting stance and, displaying grace and confidence, slowly but decisively moved past the surrounding young people, who looked at her with genuine interest and slight surprise. A mysterious and determined smile played across her face, a subtle and meaningful sign that Lian was fully prepared to unleash her special attack, which she kept secret, like a precious, secret weapon capable of changing the course of any confrontation. At that moment, she rushed forward like an arrow, gaining such incredible speed that no one present could catch up with her or predict how she would escape from everything that had ever held her back, demonstrating strength of spirit and unbending determination to overcome any obstacles. The girl rushed forward like a gust of wind, carrying her things in her hands and quietly laughing, as if the whole world around her had become light and carefree, and the wind played with her hair, creating a feeling of freedom and joyful flight in the vastness of the academy. The academy towered around them, its mighty high walls seeming impregnable, as if they guarded not only knowledge, but also a multitude of secrets. While the spacious corridors and majestic halls were filled with light, casting soft shadows on the ancient stone beneath their feet. A magical seal created with a feather shone on the table, its blue glow softly illuminating the room, lending an atmosphere of mystery and solemnity, as if a special power was stored here, capable of changing the course of events and revealing new knowledge. Lian confidently walked into the listening room where adults had already gathered, listening attentively to the girl's account of the conversation she had recorded earlier, how she had been bullied, and who exactly had participated in those unpleasant moments. The professor, wearing glasses and looking worried, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said with concern that he had been informed of a serious conflict between students, which apparently went beyond the scope of ordinary disagreements and required immediate intervention. Afterwards, the professor addressed Lian with warm words, noting how good it was that she had a recording device that allowed her to document the bullying and defend herself to everyone who was listening attentively. Presenting herself as vulnerable and a victim, the girl sincerely expressed gratitude to the teachers for their attention and support, gently admitting that she was terribly frightened by what had happened, and tremblingly hoped for their fair and timely intervention, capable of protecting her rights. Then, blushing slightly and making a sweet, barely noticeably shy face, she gently put her hand to her cheek, as if demonstrating her vulnerability, and with pure innocence added that she deeply believed in the strict but fair rules of the academy, which would not allow such egregious incidents to go unpunished or forgotten. All the teachers, imbued with Lian's sincerity and firm determination, unhesitatingly united to become her reliable support and protection in this difficult conflict, firmly determined to not allow injustice and bias to find a place within the sacred walls of the academy. At the very moment when the last words of encouragement rang in the air, the heavy doors of the classroom slammed shut behind Lian, like a solemn symbol closing one chapter and opening a new one filled with trials, struggles, and the inevitable growth in this harsh world. The girl walked slowly down the long corridor of the school, although in reality she did not like the attention she felt from those around her, because it made her feel uncomfortable and sometimes even anxious in her usual surroundings. Lian mentally stubbornly convinced herself that everything was fine and there was no reason to worry, because she had already learned to cope with any difficulties and get out of the most confusing and difficult circumstances that fate threw her way, without losing her composure and faith in herself. Suddenly, Lian felt a sharp discomfort and, unable to stay on her feet, collapsed to the floor, instinctively grabbing the wall to somehow maintain her balance and avoid a complete fall, despite the weakness that gripped her body. She braced her hands on the cold floor and struggled to catch her breath, taking in ragged inhales and exhales as if trying to regain control of herself and cope with the sudden attack that seemed to have come upon her without warning. Leaning her back against the walls of the corridor, Lian breathed heavily, trying with every second to gather strength and not let weakness take over her, while the world around her seemed blurry and distant, as if she was floating in a fog of uncertainty and anxiety. So upon entering the room, the beauty gently lay down on the bed and wrapped herself in a soft pink blanket, allowing herself to relax and unwind, feeling the warmth of the blanket envelop her like a cozy embrace after a long and stressful day. A childhood memory pierced her mind. She was sitting on the cold floor, immersed in reading, patiently waiting for her parents to return so they could go on a long-awaited picnic together. Filled with joy and family warmth that seemed eternal and unattainable. When Lian was only 10, her parents suddenly fell ill with an incurable disease, and this terrible ordeal changed her life forever, forcing her to face the bitterness of loss and the unpredictability of fate, which robbed her of the peace and carefree life of childhood. Sitting on the cold floor of her room, unable to accept what was happening, she began to take up medical botany, hoping that knowledge and effort would help her find a cure and save her beloved parents, inspiring herself with the faith and perseverance that became her strength. In the mountains, Lian searched daily for rare herbs and plants that could help with healing, despite the constant risks and dangers she had to face, driven by the hope of finding the long-awaited cure for her parents. Every morning, as soon as dawn broke, Lian set out on an endless search, never giving up and never losing faith, despite those around her convincing her of the futility of the undertaking. However, she continued her risky journey, ready to sacrifice her life for the slightest hope of saving her loved ones and restoring their health. One such day, Lian, huddled and hanging her arm over a steep cliff, tried with incredible effort and risking her life to reach a rare, mystically glowing plant, the only one that, in her deep conviction, could be the salvation of her parents. With a satisfied, sincere smile on her lips, Lian returned home, carefully holding the rare herbs she had collected in her hands, which she carefully placed in her bag, filled with hope and faith that this amazing plant would help heal her parents and restore their lost health. As she opened the door to her home, beaming with joy and pride, Lin held up a flower in front of everyone, a symbol of her persistent struggle, fortitude, and inexhaustible hope for a bright future that she so passionately desired to give to her family, despite all the trials and difficulties. At that moment, her parents breathed their last, and their weak, limp arms lay on the bed, like the last threads of life that were slowly breaking, leaving Lian alone with severe pain and loss that was impossible to survive. Shocked and devastated, the little girl slowly lowered her hand with the plant, realizing that all her efforts were in vain. As if the bright hope was slowly fading, leaving her in deep sadness and hopelessness in the face of loss. And then, standing in the dark, mournful church at her parents' funeral, Lian felt all her hopes and dreams crumble into dust, like fragile glass shattering on the cold ground, leaving her alone with the immeasurable pain of loss and despair. After this terrible loss, Lian withdrew into herself, remaining in her own world, refusing to talk to anyone, avoiding communication and not leaving her room, as if trying to hide from the pain and unbearable grief that seemed insurmountable to her. Her black eyes seemed bottomless and empty, as if all the light of life had disappeared from them, reflecting the deep inner emptiness and hopelessness that had settled in her soul after all the trials and losses she had had to face. The now grown-up, beautiful Lian sat down next to her little self, as if lost in memories and thoughts, and quietly decided that perhaps it was better never to hope for a miracle. because believing in it only brought pain and disappointment. Hugging herself tightly, as if trying to hold on to at least the remnants of warmth and any support, she decided to live without hope, accepting into her heart only the bitter despair that seemed easier to bear, because it saved her from new wounds and suffering. Slowly raising her hand and sticking it out from under the blanket, sweet Lian reminded herself that she should never show her weaknesses to her friends, because they could become a weapon against her. And only by being strong and unwavering could she preserve herself in this harsh world. After this, she slowly got out of bed, finally waking up and making a firm decision for herself not to make any more friends, so as not to again experience the disappointments and betrayals that intimacy with other people brought. Her gaze fell downwards, and her dark hair, falling freely in waves, swayed slightly, as if reflecting the storm of doubts and worries raging within her, which did not let go of her thoughts, forcing her to think with anxiety and uncertainty about the upcoming future and inevitable loneliness. Sitting with her head down, she was deeply aware and accepting the fact that after graduation, her friendships with the boys would definitely end, leaving her alone. And this inevitable prospect filled her heart with sadness and anxiety that was difficult to hide. Having joined the club and started communicating with Carcian and Fjord, she gradually got used to their company, spending more and more time with them, feeling a quiet connection developing between them that, although short-lived, brought her a feeling of support and temporary comfort. Suddenly, Lian shook her head sharply from side to side, as if trying to get rid of obsessive thoughts and doubts, realizing that her action was stupid and naive, and the slight blush that covered her cheeks betrayed her sincere feelings and inner embarrassment. On the soft, large sofa, a carelessly folded pink blanket remained, exuding the warmth of a recent presence and seeming to be the only reminder of a moment of peace that had dissolved in the noise of a weekday in academic life. The massive building of the great and famous academy rose like a majestic bastion of knowledge, its corridors filled with the echo of footsteps, the voices of students, and the rustle of pages, forever drawing young minds in search of truth. A boy in a strict school uniform was slowly walking down the corridor, holding an open book in front of him, when someone's quick steps caught up with him from behind, immediately followed by the voice of a friend. It was Fjord, calling his name with slight surprise. The blonde stopped slowly, turning his head slightly to the side, and with a barely noticeable smile explained that he was currently a little busy reading a book, although there was no irritation in his voice, rather a slight polite detachment and calm. Earlier, walking down the corridor of the academy, he walked slowly with an open book in his hands, completely absorbed in reading, and did not notice anything around him, until he noticed how someone suddenly froze in place behind him. However, the boy suddenly flinched when Lian silently approached him from behind, and suddenly, with a hint of mischief, loudly shouted his name, as if deliberately testing whether she could catch him off guard, causing a moment of genuine surprise to flash in his eyes. Immediately after this, the girl smiled sweetly, her lips curved into a soft, slightly playful smile, and a mocking mischief sparkled in her bright eyes, as if she had no intention of apologizing. On the contrary, she was watching his confused reaction with a satisfied look. And then the aristocrat spoke calmly and confidently, slightly adjusting her hair, and said that she had not come to him by chance, but with one specific and important request, which, as one could guess, had special meaning and a note of personal interest for her. Soon night rose over the horizon, and a full moon reigned in the bottomless sky, filling the roofs of the educational institution with a silver light, which at this hour seemed especially mysterious, as if hiding its secrets and stories in the shadows. Even at night, the large academy building looked majestic and imposing. The stone walls cast long shadows in the moonlight, and the tall arches and columns, illuminated by dim lanterns, gave it a mysterious and slightly enigmatic appearance. Under the starry sky, where the flickering of the luminaries was reflected in the glass windows of the academy, Fjord finally came to the conclusion that it was time for them to seriously deal with the very same trio that had previously dared to threaten Lian and tried to offend her dignity. Fjord, looking thoughtfully at the night sky, finally came to the conclusion that he and Carcian needed to deal with the trio of students who had previously threatened Lian as soon as possible, because leaving things as they were meant exposing her to further danger. The boys gradually came to the conclusion that Lian might have joined them not out of genuine sympathy, but solely because of Carcian's sad and mysterious face, which, as it seemed to them, was the reason for her interest and gentle affection. At some point in the past, Lian had already allowed herself a light but very noticeable flirtation with another student. And it was this long ago memory that made the guys wonder how sincere her current intentions might have been, and whether all this was happening again, only with another participant in her game. Judging Lean's true feelings was almost impossible. Her demeanor skillfully balanced between charming flirtation and innocent joking, leaving everyone around her completely confused, where the fine line between play and sincerity was lost without a trace. Young Carcian, embarrassed and confused, looked down at his hand, remembering the fleeting touches, and could not understand whether she really liked him or whether everything that was happening was just part of her usual coquetry and desire not to be alone. The guy asked doubtfully if his friend was really that worried about this situation, and if he didn't believe his words, he could just listen to that very audio recording to verify what happened for himself. An alarming rumor had already begun to spread rapidly through the spacious corridors of the academy, and rumors of an unpleasant incident in which some students were allegedly involved began to circulate more and more frequently among the students, causing genuine interest and slight tension. Fjord, taking a deep breath, as if already anticipating the scale of the impending scandal, said with a tired but determined note in his voice that, most likely, the entire academic building would be buzzing with discussions the very next day, since such rumors were spreading with alarming speed. Carcian, despite the words of his comrade, seemed not to hear a single sound, because all his attention was riveted to only one thing, to his own beautiful face and doubts about how it was perceived in the eyes of the kind Lian. With a slight blush on his cheeks, the young man admitted that, according to his observations, his sweet and attractive face unfortunately had not previously made the desired impression on Lin, as he had expected, which slightly hurt his self-confidence and caused him slight embarrassment. But suddenly Fjord, clearly tired of these endless conversations and attempts to explain the situation, spoke with a serious note in his voice and declared that he no longer wished to discuss such things, because they were only a distraction and did not bring any benefit to solving the current problem. Glancing sideways at his friend, the blond man with a slight grin ordered him to immediately remove the naive blush from his face, as if it were something unacceptable for an aristocrat of their circle, and thus tried to diffuse the situation with a witty and light joke. Lin was surprised because she constantly teased the school's haughty, skillfully playing with his emotions and making jokes which caused mixed feelings in him. But he never took it seriously because her behavior was part of their special dynamic. Moreover, with her sparkling smile and charm, she knew how to make Carcian feel better, as if filling his mood with light and warmth, which significantly improved his internal state, especially during difficult and stressful moments of study. Every day, the man was faced with the fact that Lian did not hesitate to tease him, but despite this, he appreciated her as a good and sincere person, understanding that behind her jokes, there was hidden a special care and interest that she felt for him. Moreover, Lian was never afraid to show courage in her communication with Carcian, openly expressing her thoughts and feelings without the slightest embarrassment, which gave their conversations liveliness and sincerity, turning their connection into something special, deeply touching the souls of both. A handsome guy, standing under the starry night sky and clutching his head, continued to think about the new girl at school, about her mysterious behavior and how she changed his familiar world, making him feel something he had not experienced for a long time. As he continued to think about her, the man could not comprehend what secret thoughts and feelings she hid deep inside her heart. Since her true emotions remained a mystery, hidden behind a light haze of mystery and meaningful hints that were elusive to him. Suddenly, standing on the roof under the twinkling starlight, Carcian spoke with seriousness and a slight bitterness in his voice, admitting that his friend had been absolutely right all along. And now he finally understood the full depth and strength of the feelings that had engulfed his heart. Fjord, trying to recall the details of his friend's conversation, listened intently, realizing that a new chapter of their destiny was now opening before them, filled with unexpected turns and emotional tension that would change their lives forever. It turned out that Carcian had become a prisoner of his new acquaintance, obsessed to the depths of his soul and immensely in love, ready to endure any trials and overcome all obstacles for her sake, despite the inevitable difficulties and uncertainty of the future. It was as if the familiar world was collapsing around me, shattering into a multitude of tiny fragments, like a broken mirror, reflecting all the fragility and instability of my inner state, filled with mixed feelings, anxiety, and vague doubts. In one of the fragments of the broken world, Carcian himself did not notice how he gradually began to genuinely care for the new student, who became more than just another acquaintance for him, awakening in him feelings he had never suspected before. That evening, Lien looked especially seductive, lying on a soft chair in the Duke's mansion, where the silence of the night and a mysterious atmosphere reigned, emphasized by the soft light pouring from the window behind the bars, and creating a play of shadows on the walls. From behind the massive window bars, a bright golden light streamed into the room, filling it with warmth and a mysterious glow that seemed to penetrate the very soul, creating an atmosphere of mystery and magic in this quiet corner of the huge mansion. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, an aristocrat appeared in the room, slowly stepping his foot onto the cold floor. His presence seemed to fill the space with special importance and an atmosphere of inevitable change, causing everyone present to freeze in anticipation. Carcian, possessing incredible magical abilities, cast a complex and powerful spatial movement spell that allowed him to instantly travel to any desired location, and soon found himself in the comfort of his own home, where he could calmly reflect on what had happened. Despite his young age, Carcian was a remarkably talented mage, mastering complex and rare spells, which set him apart from his peers and made him a true hope for the Academy in the field of magical arts and various research. With a light and confident movement of his thin finger, he pointed to an ancient bell installed nearby, and it, as if responding to an unspoken desire, rang loudly and resonantly, cutting through the silence and attracting the attention of everyone present in the room. At that very moment, a stately butler with a clear, loud voice appeared in the room and sharply asked who dared to appear here without prior warning. But, noticing the young gentleman, he immediately changed his tone to a friendly one and showed due respect. When the servant inquired what the young man was doing at such a late hour, Carcian calmly and confidently ordered that a warm and soft blanket be brought to him immediately, so that he could take refuge from the cold night air and feel comfortable and at peace. The butler, demonstrating impeccable manners and respect, confirmed the order with a deep bow and hastened to fulfill the request, heading to the bedding closet in search of the coziest and warmest blanket for his master. Carcian, however, only increased his demands, persistently pushing his servant to carry out his orders much faster and without delay, showing how important it was for him to get what he wanted as quickly as possible, since every minute was worth its weight in gold. The servant, rushing quickly along the long corridor, despite his fatigue and the bustle around him, with anxiety and responsibility in his heart, tried not to allow even the slightest delay, because the comfort and well-being of the important gentleman, for whom he served faithfully and truly, depended on the speed and accuracy of the execution of his order. Suddenly, a sudden flash of thought, like lightning, pierced the servant's mind, and he wondered with slight excitement and bewilderment why the master needed a blanket at such a late hour and in such a difficult time, because it could conceal much more meaning than just a desire to hide from the cold and warm up. With a smile appearing on the servant's face, he suddenly realized that, most likely, the blanket was needed not just for warmth, but to cover someone's body, perhaps hiding something important, or protecting in a moment of vulnerability. At that moment, young Carcian froze, his gaze fixed on the sofa, where a golden blanket with the Duke's coat of arms lay on top, a symbol of power and nobility, which suddenly gave the scene additional meaning and mystery. The young man waved his hand easily and confidently, awakening deep wells of magical mana within himself, which, like a living flame, began to flow within, filling his body with strength and energy, ready to be embodied in a powerful spell at any moment. Slowly, like a dark spot in space, a deep and inexplicable black hole began to appear under the sofa, gradually expanding and drawing in everything around it, including Carcian himself, absorbing him into its bottomless darkness with an invisible force. Carcian masterfully manipulated the very essence of space, using his unique abilities to remove unnecessary furniture, as if transporting it to another world, freeing up space and simplifying the environment, turning it into an effortless and graceful act of magical art. Only high-level magicians could masterfully control space so skillfully that even a cup that had appeared would suddenly disappear, as if dissolving into nothingness, and become inaccessible to the eye, as if disappearing from reality, controlled by the will of the magician. Thus, Carcian showed himself to be a true genius of magic, using powerful and complex spells of the highest order, not for the sake of greatness, but simply to accomplish the simple task of removing an unnecessary object from sight, proving that true power lies in subtlety and mastery. After the magic took shape, he thought about his beloved, genuinely wondering if she would like the sofa he was about to give her, hoping that this unusual gift would become a source of comfort and warmth for her on cold and lonely days. Thinking of her, he sheepishly covered his face with his hand, wishing with all his heart that she would be as comfortable and relaxed as possible, lying on the soft surface that he had lovingly prepared for her, dreaming of her sincere smile and peace of mind. Kind Lean, gently sliding her fingers over the soft blanket, carefully touched the blanket as if feeling all its gentle warmth and care. And at that very moment, it seemed that she was ready to plunge into a light, calm, and deep sleep, sheltered from all life's worries and everyday concerns. His hands gently and carefully grabbed the blanket, intending to cover her fragile body, as if sleeping in a fairy tale with it, carefully covering her shoulders so that she would not freeze under the cool breath of the wind. If she were carefully covered with this soft blanket, then under the warm rays of the sun that gently penetrate through the window, Leon could easily and serenely fall asleep, feeling reliably protected and sincerely loved, as if in the most tender and caring embrace of the world. With a slight blush on his cheeks, slightly embarrassed but sincerely hoping, Carcian secretly wished that this simple but incredibly touching and heartfelt gesture would once again bring to her face that bright, gentle, and sincere smile that warmed his heart and gave him the strength to live and create further. Suddenly, the man grabbed his head with his hands, overcome by an endless stream of disturbing thoughts and fears that did not give him a moment of peace, as if darkness had descended on his mind, overshadowing everything around and leaving no room for light and hope in his soul. At that moment, when the aristocrat calmly relaxed, she playfully raised her thumb up, demonstrating unconditional approval and satisfaction with what was happening. as if sending an invisible but very significant sign of support and comfort that filled his heart with warmth. Carcian, as if enchanted, constantly glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, unable to be distracted, because his thoughts constantly returned to Lian, occupying his entire consciousness and causing his pulse to quicken, as if she were the center of his world and a source of endless inspiration. Lian, with playful persistence, continued to lightly poke her finger into the young man's cheek, causing him to feel slightly embarrassed and a barely noticeable smile, like a gentle breeze that whispers of spring and awakens tender and bright feelings in the heart, leaving not a moment of peace. Sometimes the two of them spent time playing board games, where laughter and a light, friendly atmosphere created a special feeling of closeness, allowing them to forget about all their worries and simply enjoy the moments spent together in comfort and mutual understanding. And sometimes Lian would pretend to kiss Carcian. It was unclear whether she was joking or genuinely flirting, making his heart beat faster and leaving room for tender guesses and excitement that awakened a thrill and sweet anticipation in his soul. The tower, constructed from thin wooden sticks, suddenly and abruptly crumbled, as if symbolizing the fragility of the moment and the fickleness of their relationship, which at times seemed just as unpredictable and shaky, but at the same time surprisingly touching. Carcian stood up irritably, loudly demanding that the girl stop teasing him, and Lian, surprised by his reaction, wearily leaned on his back as if looking for support, and realizing that their game had turned into something more than just an ordinary joke. A frightened Lian quickly spoke up, trying to explain that her actions were just a joke, and sincerely asked Carcian for forgiveness, promising that she would never tease him like that again, wanting to maintain and strengthen the fragile balance between them. At that very moment, Lian looked genuinely guilty, her eyes reflecting genuine feelings of regret and tenderness, as if asking for forgiveness without words, to restore the lost trust and harmony in their complex relationship, filled with play and mutual teasing. Carcian, noticing her sincerity, spoke softly, assuring her that there was no need to dwell on trifles, because everything between them was fair and honest. Sometimes he teased her, and sometimes she responded in kind, and in this mutual fun they found their closeness and understanding. The academy housed a large, bright women's dormitory, the walls of which were painted pure white, creating an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility, where each girl could find a place to rest and recuperate after a long day of school. The room that served as a bedroom was neatly furnished, a massive door, a clock hanging on the wall, measuredly counting down the time, and furniture, a comfortable bed and a chest of drawers, completed the interior, creating a feeling of homely warmth and security in this spacious dormitory. Lian lay on the soft bed, immersed in deep thoughts that did not give her a moment of peace. Like dark clouds obscuring the gentle light of peace and warmth that she so passionately strove for in this endless silence of the night. Covering her face with a light hand, she tried to understand whether there was any point in accepting her changing mood, coming to terms with the internal storms and waves of anxiety that were slowly rolling over her soul, preventing her from finding the long-awaited peace and clarity of mind. Suddenly, there was a soft but insistent knock on the door, barely audible in the silence of the night, as if someone was knocking carefully, afraid of waking the whole house, but desperately wanting an answer, making Lian's heart beat faster and filling her with anxious anticipation. Awakened by an unexpected noise, the sweet and beautiful Lian wondered whether she should open the door at this late hour, torn between her desire to remain quiet and her curiosity to find out who dared to disturb her privacy at this difficult moment. Falling back onto the soft bed, Lian was determined not to open the door to anyone and to continue trying to sleep. Despite the persistent knocking that still sounded in the silence, disrupting her attempts to find the long-awaited peace and forget herself in sleep. However, the persistent knocking continued to sound behind the door, and gathering all her inner strength and determination, Lian slowly rose from the bed, taking steps towards the door despite the fear and uncertainty, to finally find out who was so unexpectedly disturbing her at this late hour. Suddenly, Carcian appeared in front of the girl, whose piercing eyes carefully scanned her from head to toe, as if trying to understand her hidden thoughts and feelings that she tried to hide, creating an atmosphere of mystery and inaccessibility around herself. Lin, amazed and a little dumbfounded, could not immediately understand how and why exactly this young man ended up in the women's dormitory, because his appearance seemed unexpected and inappropriate, causing her internal dissonance and confusion. Without hesitation, the girl slammed the door firmly, seeking to regain her sense of privacy and control, while gently but firmly sending Carcian away to preserve what little security remained to her at that moment. Her face was frozen in genuine shock and confusion. The expression of fear and incomprehension seemed to reflect an internal struggle between the desire to accept what had happened and the attempt to fence herself off from the unexpected and frightening reality. Peeking out from behind the door once more, Lian decided to finally make sure that Carcian had really come to her, because her heart was beating with slight excitement and hope that this unexpected visit would not cause new worries and doubts. And indeed, Carcian himself stood before her, smiling affably, whispering with the morning light and sincerely wishing her good morning, as if trying to give a moment of warmth and peace in her difficult life. The girl stood silently next to the door. Her tired hand slowly slid to her face, as if trying to erase the traces of anxiety, tension, and fatigue that had accumulated over the day in her soul. Thoughts and eyes full of hidden sadness and great hope. Putting her trembling, icy cold palm to her cheek, the girl could not believe that she had just been called by name, suddenly and without any warning, by the very friend whom she had considered almost forgotten, disappeared and gone forever. Slightly opening the old door, creaking with age, she looked out to finally make sure that it really was her old friend standing in front of her, and the bewilderment in her eyes reflected anxiety, confusion, and a reluctance to believe in a simple coincidence. Carcian hesitated, confused, quickly looked away, not knowing where to go, scratched his cheek, then ran his hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the awkwardness, because the words drowned in his head did not allow them to escape from his constricted throat. Lian, without taking her attentive, almost piercing gaze away, stared at him, with hidden anxiety in her eyes, as if she could not understand why he had suddenly become so silent. And in silence, she waited for an answer to the question that she herself was afraid to formulate. When the beautiful girl suddenly pulled him by the hand into her room, the young man screamed in fear, as if he had not expected such a sharp and confident gesture, and his voice sounded alarm, confusion, and slight panic from the sudden intrusion. Lian, not paying much attention to his fear, abruptly slammed the heavy, creaking door behind them. And the next moment, they were left alone in her room, filled with tension, silence, semi-darkness, and a strange atmosphere of anticipation. After a few drawn-out seconds, she was the first to break the loud silence that had fallen, turning to the young man with a slight wariness in her gaze, and asking in a calm voice what had happened, and why he had reacted with such obvious fear. The man didn't answer right away, but simply turned his gaze to her hand, which was tightly clutching his, and was surprised to note how strong, hard, and tenacious her grip was. It was at that moment that she suddenly pulled her hand away. Releasing his wrist, Lian looked down in embarrassment, then apologized in a quiet voice, noting that she was simply in a hurry and did not notice how she squeezed his hand too tightly, because she was carried away by emotions and the haste of the situation. But suddenly, Carcian realized that he actually really liked her gentle touch, and when she turned to him tenderly and quietly, warmth, tenderness, and slight excitement flared up in his soul, as if awakening feelings hidden deep inside. Sweet Lin, stunned and amazed, seemed to freeze in shock with her mouth wide open, unable to believe that she could evoke such a reaction in him that turned her entire inner picture of the world upside down, filling her heart with surprise and awe. All flushed and embarrassed, Carcian suddenly resolutely asked her to call him only by his nickname from now on, as if trying to hide his true vulnerability and show a new, playful, and mysterious image that he wanted to preserve in her eyes. At that very moment, as if by magic, soft and fluffy cat ears seemed to grow on his head, which gave him an unusually cute and charming appearance, as if embodying the image of a naughty kitten from a kind fairy tale or a funny myth. With a satisfied smile on her face, Lian realized that she had finally managed to tame this wayward and difficult cat, and warm feelings of joy, satisfaction, and quiet happiness that she had been searching for and longing to find for so long began to play in her soul. They had only recently met, and so it seemed strange how quickly Carcian had become attached to her, as if their souls had become invisibly intertwined in a short period of time, and the cold distance between them had gradually begun to dissolve in the warmth of new feelings. Before, he had always acted cold and distant, snapping back and pushing her away in a reserved manner, as if afraid to show his true emotions, and his harsh words were like walls built around a heart that did not want to let anyone inside. The girl quickly accepted the changes that had taken place, smiling brightly and sincerely, not wanting to give up the thin thread that connected them, and hoping that her warmth and patience could melt even the most unyielding ice in his soul. Her hand involuntarily clenched into a fist. She knew there was no point in harboring illusions about eternal love, especially judging by past experiences where feelings were short-lived and hopes turned into bitter disappointment and painful lessons. And so the beautiful girl gave a light, sincere, and playful laugh, and said with a soft smile that she really liked his unusual nickname, adding notes of playfulness, tenderness, and genuine warmth to her voice that instantly awakened new feelings in Carcian. Confused and surprised, Carcian suddenly turned to her, not expecting that she would so easily and happily accept his feelings. And his heart suddenly began to beat faster from the unexpected warmth emanating from her sincere, soft, and penetrating gaze. He blushed even more from her sweet, ringing, and infectious laughter, which sounded so sincere, playful, and kind that the young man felt head over heels in love, as if for the first time in his life he allowed himself to be truly open and vulnerable. The girl slowly but confidently took a step towards him, continuing to tenderly and affectionately pronounce his nickname, as if it were a magical name, capable of melting the coldest and most impenetrable ice, and opening the heart to new, sincere feelings and warm experiences. Suddenly, completely unexpectedly, without warning, and as if by a sudden impulse of the soul, she sharply waved her hand forward, as if inviting Carcian to follow her into a new, still unknown, but enticing adventure. Filled with a slight trepidation and joyful anticipation, gently, like a light and warm breeze, Lian ran her hand over his exhausted face, quietly asking if he was okay. Noticing that he had suddenly become too red, as if heat and embarrassment had engulfed his entire body. And in his eyes there was a hidden deep worry that she was trying to understand and dispel. At first, the girl gently and carefully stroked his cheek and chin, and he, gradually relaxing and yielding to her soft and gentle touches, seemed vulnerable and trusting, as if opening up to her like a thin book, the pages of which only she could read and carefully turn. But suddenly his masculine, strong face unexpectedly became cold, gloomy, and threatening. His eyes darkened, and his expression acquired a hardness, as if a shadow of doubt, anger, and internal struggle had descended on him. changing the former tenderness and warmth to restrained danger and tension. The unfrozen fear, her eyes wide with anxiety and confusion. She could not understand what had changed in him so abruptly and radically. Why the one she had seen earlier had suddenly turned into a completely different person, filled with internal conflict and unspeakable pain. Carcian suddenly approached her face, looking attentively, with extraordinary care, into her eyes, and quietly, almost in a whisper, asked if she had cried recently, noticing on her pale cheeks barely noticeable but deep traces of tears, remaining as a painful reminder of the past, difficult and bitter experience that still lived in her soul. The beauty turned away, trying to hide her embarrassment, and lied that no, she had not cried, although her heart was squeezed with pain and reluctance to open up, and her voice trembled slightly, betraying her internal struggle between the truth and the desire to appear strong. To all the questions, full of concern and excitement, if someone tried to get to the bottom of the truth, the girl denied, dodged, and turned the other way, as if fearing that the truth would cause even more pain and lead to unexpected consequences. Hearing her words that if he continued to swear at her, his face would become ugly and evil, Carcian was truly frightened, as if he felt a hidden prophetic power in them, and in the depths of his soul, a spark of tender anxiety and a deep sense of responsibility for her condition dawned. Gently and carefully grabbing her head, the man sincerely promised the lady that he would definitely take care of everything, protect and guard her, like a devoted knight, ready to withstand any storms and trials of life for the sake of her peace, safety, and long-awaited happiness. Lean, embarrassed and deeply touched by his sweet care and warm, encouraging words, tried not to worry, and with each passing moment to believe more and more in the sincerity of his promises, although worries and doubts still played inside her, which gradually gave way to bright hope. And so a gentle, bright smile soon appeared on her face, like the spring sun breaking through the clouds, illuminating her gaze with warmth and hope that she had not experienced for a long time, filling her heart with lightness and quiet joy at this important moment. Down a long, slightly shaded corridor in the academy, a door adorned with carvings and antique metal fittings led directly into a cozy clubroom, a place where people gathered for discussions, games, and important conversations, filled with an atmosphere of comfort and mystery. There, near the window, behind a wide chessboard, sat a pensive Fjord, immersed in deep thought, as if trying to find an answer to an important question that haunted him and forced him to replay the events over and over in his head. The girl had previously approached him with a request for help, handing over a pen containing an audio recording, valuable information that she had carefully preserved, and which could be the key to solving a complex conflict involving influential and wealthy children. Leanne explained to him in detail that the recording was a copy of an audio file related to her conflict with the rich kids, and that it was this information that could shed light on the hidden intrigues and injustices she faced, hoping for his understanding and support. At first, Fjord didn't believe her and looked at the pen with surprise and disbelief, as if not expecting that such a small device could contain such important and potentially destructive information that could change the course of events. The girl suddenly smiled maliciously. A spark of determination flashed in her gaze, and she suggested that he make sure that rumors about the stupid and arrogant aristocrats quickly spread throughout the academy, awakening righteous anger and fueling popular discontent. The young man thought deeply, a slight, sly smile slowly playing across his face. He carefully considered all the nuances of her proposal, and finally, with a slight grin filled with cunning and approval, he agreed, realizing that such a move could radically turn the situation around. The academy had long been plagued by brutal discrimination based on social status, unfair inequality fueling hidden hatred and malice, and students from the lower classes languished under this injustice, quietly gritting their teeth at their wealthy peers, dreaming of the day when everything would change radically. The rich children, like kings on the throne, ruled boldly and shamelessly, seizing power in the academy, controlling the destinies of others, and neglecting everyone who stood lower in social status, supporting the old order and various social barriers. Fjord, standing by the window and watching the game, was impressed not only by its strength, but also by the unexpected skills of the newcomer, who turned out to be much more cunning and agile than expected, demonstrating grace and strategic thinking that could surprise even experienced players. However, his face soon changed to an expression of serious thought, because he realized that her skills were still not enough to completely control the situation, especially considering the high qualifications and experience of her opponents, who were the children of aristocrats with influence and power. At the chessboard sat influential children from noble aristocratic families, whose play was distinguished by cold calculation and strategic depth, ready to strike a surprise blow, and only one mistake could lead to defeat in this intellectual duel. However, like a chess piece that can make the decisive move and deliver checkmate, she skillfully used her limited abilities to create a threat that could completely change the balance of power on the board and put her opponents in a difficult position. Fjord thoughtfully said that, in principle, Lian now deserved a new status and recognition, and this should not be a problem for her at all, because her efforts and character led to well-deserved respect among her peers and the Academy's teachers. After all, Lian has now become the object of sincere attention and tender love of the school prince, who symbolizes power and protection, becoming the roof of the academy and a bright symbol of a new day, opening up new opportunities and changes for all students. Rumors quickly spread throughout the academy that 3 wealthy aristocrats had been decisively expelled for cruel bullying and harassment of other students, causing widespread controversy and a wave of discussion among the entire student body and faculty. The students discussed among themselves that in such a situation, other students would have done the same thing long ago, and that injustice should be punished because it was impossible to tolerate such things, and it was time to put an end to it. The students were clearly excited and, with genuine agitation, were vigorously discussing the events that had happened earlier, interrupting each other, sharing their versions, emotions, and guesses, as if everyone wanted to understand how all this could have happened and what would happen next. The students, gathered around one table, were shocked when even the director, usually cautious in his statements, decided to openly speak out against the aristocrats and mercilessly expelled them from the academy, demonstrating determination and justice. Other students, gathered outside in quiet groups, discussed with apprehension and anxiety the recent terrible events associated with the expulsion, and shared their fears and guesses about what had happened, since such changes could not have passed unnoticed by them. Namely, the fact that the families of these 3 nobles fell into poverty became known only recently, and now does not give anyone peace, causing everyone to worry, discuss, and reflect on how quickly the fate of even the most noble and influential people can change. Meanwhile, workers reported that something terrible had happened. A cave-in had occurred in the mine, and part of it had collapsed, causing panic and fears for the fate of the workers, which only exacerbated the atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty among local residents. At the same time, a wealthy ship carrying valuable cargo sank during a severe storm, which was another blow to influential families, worsening their already difficult situation and forcing many to consider change and destiny. A strange, cold calm enveloped the warehouses of wealth, where bustle and abundance once reigned, but now silence and darkness seemed to consume everything around, reflecting the changes that affected not only the property, but also the destinies of the people associated with this place. Lian, sitting on a soft sofa, hiding her face in her hands, plunged into deep thought, trying to comprehend what was happening. Her thoughts revolved around difficult events, and her face reflected tension and anxiety that did not let up even for a moment. With her hands clasped in front of her, she quickly realized that she was in a catastrophic situation with no easy way out, and that the consequences of what had happened could affect not only her, but also many loved ones, changing the course of her life and filling her with fear and uncertainty. She recalled how the aristocrats she had previously encountered and tried to negotiate with now found themselves shattered and broken, their lives and status crumbling under the weight of a just justice that spared no one who violated the law and moral principles. But what was taking possession of her thoughts and worries like a heavy weight pressed on her head, and she lowered it down, feeling how rumors and sacred warnings were spreading around that if anyone got involved with her, then trouble and misfortune would certainly follow. Holding her head in her hands and struggling with internal pain, the girl was afraid that she would never find reliable and loyal friends among her acquaintances, and that her loneliness would only increase, cutting her off from the opportunity to support and be supported in difficult times. Fjord, sitting next to her, tried to calm her down, gently saying that, despite everything, Lien continued to be part of this academic crowd, and her presence here mattered, even if everything now seemed hopeless and confusing. Looking away with a frustrated expression and barely keeping her voice from shaking, the girl admitted that everything now seemed completely different to her than before, and that her social life had collapsed like a fragile house of cards, leaving only emptiness, anxiety, and fear of an uncertain future. She looked thoughtfully into his dark, night sky-like eyes, immersed in her innermost thoughts and memories, which filled her heart and mind like a quiet whirlpool of feelings and experiences, not allowing her to be distracted from her inner world. Suddenly, as if out of thin air, a rose appeared, and with it a subtle, exquisite aroma filled the room, gently enveloping the space, like a promise of a new beginning and warm feelings that were about to flare up in her fragile soul. It was her new lover, a young man with a sincere and bright smile on his face, filled with tenderness and trepidation, who decided to give her a beautiful rose to show the depth of his feelings, sincere care and desire to bring her joy and warmth. With a sweet and charming smile, Carcian slowly approached her, wanting to please her, to leave a warm and tender mark on her heart, to remind her of himself and his feelings, which grew and strengthened every day, despite all the obstacles, doubts, and fears. He was surprised when the girl did not accept his gift immediately, but rather lowered her eyes in embarrassment, timidly explaining that picking flowers just to show concern was not worth it, because true love does not need such external gestures and requires more understanding and sincerity. These words deeply struck the aristocrat, and he lowered his head with a slight sadness, placing the rose next to him, realizing that true feelings are expressed not through ostentatious gifts, but through sincerity and respect, which cannot be bought or shown externally. But Lien quickly reassured him and gently suggested carefully placing the flower in a beautiful vase to preserve its delicate beauty and symbolism, without damaging the delicate rose, which had already become an iconic symbol of their mutual care and the bright beginning between them. Inspired by her kind and warm words, Carcian happily replied okay, and immediately ran to carry out her careful instructions, trying not to disappoint her in anything, and to do everything perfectly in order to show his respect and sincere desire to make her truly happy. As he prepared to teleport to quickly find a suitable vase, a sudden light breeze played with his clothes and fluttered his hair, as if nature itself supported his impulse, giving him strength and accelerating his movements, as if emphasizing the importance and determination of his intentions. Fjord explained, tired but smiling, that his friend had a lot of powerful magic which he sometimes wasted on trifles and small things, not always using his abilities rationally, which sometimes caused surprise and sometimes even mild irritation in those around him. The girl thought awkwardly to herself that her new boyfriend had suddenly become a much more open and pleasant person, which sincerely gladdened her heart and instilled bright hope for a warm, sincere, and strong relationship, filled with mutual understanding and support. Whatever she said to him, he always smiled, looking at her with warm attention and sincere interest, as if every word she said was important and valuable to him. and his patient listening gave her a feeling of support and understanding in the most difficult moments. Lian especially loved the blankets he gave her. Soft, warm, and cozy, like a small garment of care and comfort that she carefully kept and enjoyed, feeling in them the warmth of his soul and attention, penetrating deep into her heart. She began to think about the opposite sex, looking into the distance and getting lost in thoughts of what could be different, of how relationships and life would change if she made a choice that would bring about changes and challenges for herself and those around her. With a slight smile on her lips, the girl looked closely at the vase with the rose that Carson had brought her. And at that moment, her heart filled with tenderness, as if this small flower had become a symbol of their growing connection and new feelings emerging between them. Suddenly, Lian began to wonder deeply if she left, her friends would still be close friends with each other, or if their bonds would be torn apart like gusty winds that tear apart the delicate threads of relationships and leave behind only emptiness, sadness, and memories of the past. Fjord was genuinely surprised that Lian considered Carson just her regular friend, while Carson himself, like an upset kitten, felt internal pain from the thought that his girlfriend had other guy friends, causing him feelings of jealousy and insecurity. Like a hurt and upset pet, he turned to her with a quiet but persistent question, asking if these guys were closer to her than he, her friend, and the person who sincerely strives to become something more than just a comrade and conversationalist for her. It was of great importance to him that she considered him to be her best friend and closest person, because deeper feelings were growing in his soul which he was afraid to show openly, fearing being rejected or misunderstood. After this, slightly embarrassed and at the same time determined, he quietly knelt down at her feet, as if showing humility and respect, and asked with trepidation which person was truly more important to her and occupied a special place in her life and tender heart. Lian suddenly laughed loudly, covering her mouth with an elegant hand and, trying not to hurt the feelings of her interlocutor, with a slight mockery and a flirtatious expression in her voice, said that this really did not have much significance or meaning for her. Carson, hearing her words as if struck in the heart by an invisible blow, blushed sharply, silently turned away and frowned, because, despite their cheerful and light tone, he took them too closely and painfully. Unable to hide his disappointment, realizing that her words could be misinterpreted, Lian quickly waved her hand, rushing to explain with a gentle smile that it was just an innocent and spontaneous joke, not worth the attention, offense, and especially the upset feelings. The expression on Carson's face became distant, sad, and downright dissatisfied, as if he suddenly realized that he meant no more to her than Fjord. And this sudden realization left an unpleasant, bitter aftertaste and a feeling of uselessness in his soul. The blonde watched with slight bewilderment and genuine interest as the conversation between the two friends unfolded before him. The awkward, shy Carson, and the girl, who seemed to be unsure of what she was feeling or what to do. With a sad expression on his face, the man slowly walked away, because he realized that he was again considered only a friend, not taken seriously, and even Lian, with whom he had sincere feelings, saw him only as a reliable but distant comrade. When the young beauty quietly, but with noticeable anxiety in her voice, asked if he wanted to be more than just friends with her, her words caught Carson off guard. He became embarrassed, began waving his hands and stuttering, trying to lie that he was not seriously thinking about marrying her. Turning away from him and trying to hide her resentment, Ling reminded him with slight bitterness that during all this time, only he and that same blonde man had she considered truly sincere friends whom she trusted and whose opinions were truly important to her. In a dark, almost despairing voice, Carson asked an alarming question, looking intently into her eyes. What if she one day makes new friends? Will everything really change, and he will disappear from her heart, turning into a distant and unnecessary memory? Surprised, with a slight shadow of confusion on her face, The girl slowly turned to him, not fully understanding what exactly he wanted to say, because she had never thought about replacing loved ones, and his words pierced her with unexpected bitterness and anxiety. The academy they attended was a large women's dormitory, a white, spacious building filled with an atmosphere of youth, rivalry, friendship, and hidden feelings that seemed to dissolve in the light walls and morning sunlight. The beauty walked leisurely along the wide corridor leading to her room, thoughtfully replaying her conversation with Cassian in her head, and reflecting on how difficult it was for her to become close to people, because every step towards friendship was accompanied by pain and anxiety. Suddenly, as she turned the corner, she crashed face first into a large cardboard box that someone was carrying, completely blocking her view, and froze in place, confused, as the sudden collision seemed to pull her out of her own thoughts and memories. The boxes suddenly began to move slowly right in front of her, and Lien, confused and not understanding what to do in such an unexpected situation, instinctively grabbed them with her hands, as if trying to prevent them from falling or hinder their further movement. Behind this sudden stream of things was another student who, noticing the stranger, flinched in surprise, froze for a moment, but then quickly came to her senses, as if about to establish a first acquaintance and help in this difficult situation. Throwing all her things aside, not caring about order, the girl with shining eyes joyfully ran towards Lien, loudly calling her name, clearly happy to finally see her in person, and not just hear about her from other academy students. After this, jumping up from the overwhelming emotions, she exclaimed with a loud squeal and sincere delight that the new girl turned out to be even sweeter, more charming, and more interesting than all the numerous rumors that had been circulating around the academy lately had said. The young student's name was Jane, and as it turned out a little later, she became not only her new roommate, but also a graduate of this year, with a cheerful character, a big soul, and a sincere desire to make friends with someone special. Sitting on the bed in the cozy room, the girls began a lively conversation, during which they exchanged names and shared their first impressions, trying to understand each other and establish friendly relations, despite all the awkwardness and shyness. Jane, displaying unexpected seriousness and even some strangeness in her behavior, quickly answered that her name was Lien, having carefully noticed the name on the nameplate sewn onto her uniform, and thus showed her sincere attention and genuine interest in her new acquaintance. Raising her hand and slightly embarrassed, the girl suggested switching to the simpler and more casual you, believing that it would be much easier for them to communicate. But Jane, a little frightened and blushing, replied that for her it still seemed very awkward and unusual. With her mouth wide open in surprise and slight excitement, Lien firmly insisted that she would call Jane by her first name, as it was very important to her. But the other girl found this too familiar and caused slight discontent and bewilderment. With a kind and sincere warm smile, the young beauty extended her hand to her new friend, saying that now as roommates, they would be able to communicate much more easily and confidentially, because life together requires mutual understanding and true warmth. Jane smiled back, a slight blush on her cheeks, agreeing that they could keep things informal and relaxed. As living together, it was important to maintain a friendly atmosphere and find joy in the little things in life. A soft, almost tender handshake ensued between them as the fingers of both girls met and intertwined lightly, symbolizing the beginning of a new, strong friendship, genuine trust and mutual support that promised to be very reliable. Fluffy, snow-white clouds floated lazily above the clear blue sky, as if guarding the peace and quiet of this early morning hour, when the world is just beginning to wake up and fill with the sounds of a new day, promising a multitude of opportunities and events. The next day at the academy, a country of noisy buildings and busy corridors, began with the first glimmer of sunlight, which gently illuminated the marble walls, creating a feeling of warmth and anticipation in the air, filled with knowledge and discovery. Early in the morning, still immersed in sweet dreams, Lien lazily tossed and turned in her bed. Closing her eyes and slowly waking up, barely audibly pronouncing words, as if begging the dream to linger for at least a few more moments until the world outside the window calls her. At this time, Jane was already cheerfully getting ready for her business, carefully applying makeup and putting on a new elegant dress, anxiously preparing for the upcoming day full of meetings and new impressions, because she wanted to look flawless and make a good impression. Lean, with her eyes still closed, tossed and turned in bed, unconsciously drooling and slightly raising her head on the pillow, as if trying to stay in the world of dreams until the bustle of a new morning penetrated her quiet and comfortable peace. Jane was already fully prepared and looked truly amazing. She winked slyly at Lian and with a mysterious, slightly playful smile admitted that she had a carefully thought out and very interesting plan that would definitely make their day unforgettable. Surprised and with a hint of genuine bewilderment, Lian looked closely at her new friend, trying to understand why she had decided to put on such a spectacular and daring, offensive makeover, as if preparing for an important and very responsible test or an unexpected adventure. After this, Lian could not resist and loudly shouted at Jane, jokingly and with slight irony, accusing her of almost depriving her of the power of speech with her too bright, abrupt, and unexpected transformation, which simply confused her and caused strong, stormy emotions. Pulling herself up on the bed and smiling, the girl joked, asking with a slight smile if her friend secretly went to collect debts from other students, to which Jane easily and with a cheerful, good-natured grin responded in the same humorous and playful tone, confirming their mutual understanding and ease of communication. Stretching widely and slowly, Lian did a light and smooth warm-up, trying to dispel the morning drowsiness and prepare her body for a busy and eventful day, filling herself with vigor, energy, and a strong desire to step forward to new experiences and adventures. Suddenly, Jane froze unexpectedly, as if frozen by a sudden realization, looking closely and intently at her lips in the mirror, as if trying to discern in the reflection something important and significant that could change her mood, plans, or even the entire course of the upcoming and such an important day. After a few moments of silence, she turned to Lin with a soft smile and a sincere offer to spend time together, go shopping, unwind, enjoy the company, and just forget about the hustle and bustle of life for a while. Jane, with genuine enthusiasm, began to energetically invite her new friend to go for a walk together, to feel the atmosphere of the city, to immerse themselves in its noise and brightness, because such moments create unforgettable memories and strengthen friendships. Having received consent, the girls headed to the city where the bustle of the fair reigned. Shopping arcades, noisy streets, many shops with a variety of goods, all this beckoned and promised pleasant discoveries, new impressions, and many joyful moments. Happy and contented, the girls walked along, carefully examining the bright souvenirs, beautiful decorations, and delicious treats, carefully selecting what could become small symbols of their friendship and the wonderful day spent together among the crowd and fun. Off to the side, a street performer holding a bright black musical instrument was selling corn and loudly inviting passers-by to stop, enjoy his playing, and come back again, creating a festive atmosphere. Lean, as if lost among the bustle of people and the multitude of colors, stood motionless, carefully looking around, not daring to take the next step, since fear and curiosity were mixed in her soul, creating a strange and trembling uncertainty. Dressed in a cute dress with elegant bows, she looked delightful, genuinely impressed, and very happy to have the opportunity to leisurely stroll, enjoying the warm air and cozy atmosphere that seemed to envelop them, along with the gentle sunlight. Smiling sincerely and gratefully, Lian thanked young Jane for insisting on walking along the shopping street together, emphasizing the importance of sometimes simply relaxing and enjoying the company of friends in a noisy and lively environment. The friend, slightly embarrassed and blushing, responded with a slight awkwardness, but at the same time with sincere gratitude, acknowledging that this walk and communication also meant a lot to her and helped her feel a little happier and more confident in this big world. Jane, inspired and full of energy, joyfully raised her hands in the air, expressing her readiness to spend all her money on shopping today, because such moments of joy and pleasure should be celebrated brightly and without regard for petty worries and restrictions. Together, enjoying every moment, they leisurely walked along the busy streets, discussing various purchases, looking at beautiful things, and sharing plans, dreaming that each new thing would become a small symbol of their strong and sincere friendship. Together, they leisurely examined the dishes, cute scarves, and various things that seemed especially charming and unusual to them, because such small joys make the day brighter and create an atmosphere of a true holiday for the soul and tender heart. With each passing moment, Lian enjoyed the warm moments spent with her new friend more and more, because in her life, there had almost never been such a close and sincere relationship. And now she clearly realized how important it was to have someone by her side who understood her deeply, shared her joys and doubts. Suddenly, Lian noticed that many passers-by were leisurely buying fragrant cookies and other sweets for a light snack. And Jane, hearing this, listened carefully and became interested in this idea, because a small treat always brings comfort and warmth, making a walk more pleasant and memorable. With a touch of curiosity and a slight smile, Jane asked Lian if she would also dare to buy something delicious from the pastries, to which she at first modestly replied that she would probably abstain, preferring not to give in to momentary desires. But over time, her opinion began to gradually change. Under a bright blue sky, they headed together to the nearest bakery, where the aroma of freshly baked goods beckoned and promised cozy moments, filled with warmth, flavor, and the little joys that make a day truly special and memorable. There, among the bakery's cozy display cases, the girls ordered cute heart-shaped cookies, which seemed especially touching and symbolic, as this shape is always associated with warmth, love, and small declarations of affection. Surprised, Lian didn't immediately understand the meaning of such an unusual shape, but next to the counter she noticed a sign explaining that you should give the heart-shaped cookie to someone you really like. And this thought made her smile and feel a little excited. The ladies carefully selected various flavors of baked goods, from classic vanilla to vibrant strawberry filling, thoughtfully discussing which delicacy would be best to choose to make this moment even more special and memorable. Jane, cheerful and casual, ran to another saleswoman, asking interested questions about whether Lian had a favorite type of guy, as if playing a light game to get to know her new friend better and add fun to their walk. Meanwhile, Lian, carrying a neatly wrapped box of cookies in her hands, ran forward, shouting loudly and joyfully that she just liked good guys, thereby expressing her sincere and slightly naive feelings that filled her heart with light and hope. In response to the beauty's words about her partner necessarily being kind and caring, Jane suddenly became upset, and a gloomy expression darkened her face, as if a shadow of doubt and sadness had passed through her soul, reminding her of some unresolved experiences. Together with her friend, they quickly found a common language. Like two kindred spirits, despite their different destinies and pasts, their conversations became warm and sincere, creating a strong foundation for a new friendship, capable of withstanding any of life's trials. The city around them was huge, with many identical houses and noisy streets which sometimes seemed faceless and cold. But for the girls, this place became increasingly cozy and filled with warmth, thanks to joint walks and confidential conversations. Clutching Lean's shoulder with a light hand, the girl carefully asked if she had someone special, a lover, about whom she could talk, trying to understand the feelings and dreams of her new friend in order to better understand her inner world. Jane, carefully holding her friend by the back, reminded her that the lady already had acquaintances at the club, and this knowledge gave her confidence, like a bright ray of hope, promising that new acquaintances would help her adapt and find her place in this big and sometimes complex world. Lean suddenly remembered that Fjord really was a good guy, and didn't even notice how surprised her new acquaintance looked at her, as if trying to read in her eyes the truth hidden behind the words and emotions that seemed so sincere and deep at the same time. Thinking that Jane had misunderstood her words, the girl suddenly started running after her friend, explaining that everything was not at all as it seemed at first glance, and trying to correct the misunderstanding in order to maintain trust and mutual understanding between them. However, Sweet Jane was already embarrassed by the fact that her companion called the guy by his first name so casually, as if she was so close to him that she could afford to address him informally, which was an unexpected and slightly alarming discovery for her. At the most unexpected moment, Fjord sneezed loudly nearby, and the slight noise instantly interrupted the conversation, filling the space with a sudden sound that attracted the attention of everyone around, as if reminding them that he was still here, alive, real, and an integral part of their shared world and destiny. Late at night, in the silence of the Academy's long corridor, someone walked slowly and deliberately forward, and the flickering shadows from the torches played on the walls, creating an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation, as if this night heralded the beginning of a new chapter filled with secrets, discoveries, and unexpected twists of fate. It was a girl with a short haircut who was thoughtfully reflecting on what had happened earlier, immersed in her thoughts and memories, as if trying to comprehend what had happened and understand how it would affect her future and relationships with others. She thought deeply about the sweet Lien, who turned out to be so kind and sincere that she did not hesitate to extend her hand of friendship at the most difficult moment, giving her a feeling of support and warmth that she had so lacked in her life before. Confused and anxious, the maiden pressed her lips together and clenched her jaw, trying to hide one deep secret that she could not yet reveal to her new friend, keeping it deep inside, like a heavy burden that did not allow her to relax and trust completely. Suddenly, Jane froze abruptly when she noticed that ahead, in the depths of the corridor, among the darkness and the flickering of a weak light, a man appeared, whose silhouette seemed mysterious and enigmatic, awakening both fear and curiosity in her soul. The respectful and graceful beauty bowed slowly, expressing respect and reverence to her master, whose authority and power were felt in her every movement, creating an atmosphere of ancient traditions and unspoken words filled with meaning and deep significance. After this, she admitted that she now lives in the same room with the new student and looks after her, taking responsibility for her behavior and well-being, although she herself does not yet fully understand what path this new connection will lead them and what trials she will have to go through. Her master turned out to be the prince of the school, a young man with a cold, penetrating gaze, who watched his servant without the slightest warmth or emotion, as if evaluating her every movement and breath, a reminder of the strict hierarchy that reigned within the walls of the academy. A young couple stood in the long corridor of the academy, and the lady whispered to the gentleman about what specific actions of her friend he would like her to report to him, trying to understand the boundaries of her duties and role in this complex world of strict rules and unwritten laws. Carcian, coldly and calmly, only shook his head slightly, as if urging Lien to ask fewer questions and limit herself to the actions that he had already clearly indicated to her, showing his firm intention to keep the situation under control and not allow any deviations from his plan. Lowering her head, the lovely girl realized that her master was in a depressed, gloomy mood that seemed to hang like a heavy cloud over his thoughts and emotions, leaving her worried and wanting to help him find peace and clarity. Breaking out of her thoughts, sweet Lien's voice suddenly rang out next to Jane, calling out to her, as if reminding her to return to the present moment and pay attention to what was happening around her, despite her inner worries. When her friend asked her what had happened, the girl replied with a slight smile that although 2 years had passed, much had remained unchanged, as if time had stood still. And with warmth, but with a hint of sadness in her voice, she tried to hide her deep feelings. Lien quickly realized that her new acquaintance was likely stressed about missing a significant amount of lecture material, experiencing the anxiety and fear of falling behind that often accompany those who strive not to miss out on important things in their studies and lives. Without hesitation, Lien warmly and thoughtfully offered Jane some fragrant cookies to lift her spirits and take her mind off her worries. Because sometimes it's the little joys that can melt the darkest clouds in the soul and bring bright and kind emotions. With a sweet, sincere, and warm smile, the girl clarified what particular flavor of baked goods Jane preferred, because she had a whole palette of sweet treats that could satisfy even the most refined preferences and bring a smile of joy and pleasure to the face. Lian asked her friend with interest which cookie she would like to choose, and Jane, slightly frowning in thought, looked around, as if trying to understand why everything around her today was so special and filled with a unique and enchanting atmosphere. And indeed, it turned out that today was Valentine's Day, when girls traditionally gave their lovers cookies as a sign of sincere declaration of feelings. And this magical atmosphere of tenderness and awe hung in the air, making every moment special and filled with dreams. Another couple also exchanged gifts, giving each other a large bag with various sweets, smiling and enjoying the moment when love and joy filled their hearts, creating a warm atmosphere of celebration and mutual attention. When Jane asked young Lian if she knew what holiday was celebrated today, the girl hesitated for a moment, lost in thought, because this day was special and filled with secrets that are not always immediately revealed, especially within the walls of the academy. Behind the thick stone walls and narrow windows of the academy, built of cold brick, there was an atmosphere of its own, as if it held many secrets and stories that had been passed down from generation to generation, making this day even more mysterious and exciting. In class, the professor reminded everyone in the room in a stern tone that celebrating so-called Cookie Day was officially forbidden within the walls of their academy, as any romantic displays violated discipline and the order of the educational process. Apparently, it was for this very reason that couples in love who did decide to give each other sweet treats or romantic souvenirs tried to do so secretly, hiding from the eyes of teachers and observing caution, as if they were participating in a real conspiracy of feelings. As soon as Lian handed her the cookie, Jane's eyes widened for a moment, as if she couldn't believe that someone would dare to break the rule for her. And this simple yet sincere display of attention caused a trembling wave of gratitude and warmth to flow through her soul. She, all ablaze with embarrassment, lowered her gaze, pressing the small box of baked goods to her chest, as if it were the most precious gift. And in that moment, all the noise of the academy disappeared for her, leaving only the feeling that she was truly dear to someone. Suddenly, Jane, still a little embarrassed, but trying to speak with a serious expression, asked her friend not to do that again because according to tradition at their academy, girls were supposed to give cookies to boys and not to each other, especially on such a special day. And suddenly, as if struck by a sudden thought, Jane offered Lian an original idea. Since cookies are a symbol of friendship today, why not give sweets to the boys from the club? Just in a friendly way, without any hint of feelings. The young girl was slightly embarrassed by such an unexpected proposal, paused for a moment in thought, then raised her head to the ceiling, as if looking for a sign of fate there, and smiled quietly, remembering how little she knew these boys. Lian, with a mischievous smile and a playful glint in her eyes, winked coquettishly at her friend, thereby making it clear that although she found the idea quite funny, it was still hardly worth implementing, since she did not have a close acquaintance with these guys. As they continued walking along the busy street, amidst the multitude of voices, smells, and colors, the girls suddenly, completely unexpectedly for themselves, started an absurd conversation. What would be less disgusting? To eat a tomato with dirt, or dirt with pieces of tomatoes? The absurdity of such a funny reasoning made young Lian unable to restrain herself, and she laughed loudly and sincerely, feeling how light and pleasant it became in her soul next to Jane, who, although strange, knew how to turn ordinary conversations into funny moments. After the girls had spent a fun and eventful time together, they said a warm goodbye at the turn of the corridor exchanging kind words and waving to each other, as if they did not want to part even for a moment. Lian stood awkwardly in front of the club's entrance, shifting from foot to foot, gathering her thoughts and trying to muster up her courage, because for some reason the visit there made her feel both internal tension and slight excitement at the same time. With a kind and slightly shy smile, the girl pushed the door, walked inside, and loudly greeted those present, hoping that she would be received warmly. But the next moment she froze in place, not believing what she saw with her own eyes. The room, which usually had a cozy and inspiring atmosphere, now resembled a disaster zone. Scattered furniture, traces of scorched objects, ash on the floor, and a feeling of complete devastation created the feeling that a fire had just passed through the place. On the floor, next to the sofa, covered in the soft pink aura, lay a blonde man whose tired body barely moved, as if all his strength had left him, leaving only a quiet shadow of his former power and deep fatigue, reflected in his closed eyelids and calm face. His friend looked at him with eyes full of flame and rage, in which burned boundless hatred and the determination to go to extreme measures for the sake of revenge, sparing neither himself nor those around him. Like a furious flame ready to burn everything in its path without a trace or mercy. Fjord, without wasting a second, extended his hand towards his girlfriend, his gaze full of pleading and despair, begging for help to save his exhausted friend from the dangerous madman, whose thoughts and actions were consumed by rage and madness, threatening everyone around him. Earlier, the school prince, having noticed the man's behavior, cautiously shrank back, his eyes widened sharply in alarm, and he began to rebel against what was happening, trying to stop the flow of violence that could turn into a disaster for everyone around. Before the girl could even take the slightest step forward, the door suddenly slammed in front of her with a loud sound, as if an invisible and irresistible force stood between her and the rest of the world, depriving her of freedom of movement and plunging her into deep shock and confusion. A bright, strange light poured out from the narrow cracks in the doors, illuminating the space around with unusual shimmers and making the heart beat faster from fear and uncertainty, as if the room itself had come to life and began to breathe its own mysterious energy. Lian remained motionless, like a statue. Her hair stood on end with fear, her body covered in goosebumps. Chaos raged in her head. She did not know what to do next, how to cope with the sudden surge of horror and the strange light that seemed simultaneously beautiful and dangerous. Suddenly, a young man with reddish hair came out from behind the door, smiling softly and welcomingly, like a ray of sunshine that warms with its light, and with kind sincerity asked Lian what they were going to do today, and what her plans were for that day. Lian, a little surprised by his appearance, noted to herself that before it seemed to her as if the room was in chaos and destruction, as if things were scattered there and there was disorder. But now the situation looked quite calm and in complete order, which caused her to feel relieved and smile a little. Carcian, resolutely shielding his friend from possible danger with his body, firmly stated that no one had touched him, and the one who had fallen quietly admitted from the floor that he had indeed not touched Carcian, but had still used magic, which created a tense and ambiguous atmosphere around them. Lian, with a slight anxiety and warmth in her voice, asked her boyfriend if he was really as kind as he seemed, and received from him a quick and confident answer of yes, which filled her heart with hope and faith in his sincerity and nobility. With a slight smile on her lips and a soft glint in her eyes, Lian asked Carcian not to change his kindness and to remain as attentive and caring as he was now, because it was this trait of his that made their connection special and valuable to her. Carcian was noticeably embarrassed by such tender and touching words that were addressed to him, and feeling the warmth spreading across his cheeks, he blushed, slightly lowering his gaze to the side, trying to hide his shyness and sincere feelings. Together they walked slowly down the long corridor of the academy, immersed in a quiet conversation about how today was a special day. The day of exchanging songs, when all couples in love shared their feelings, with trepidation and joy, through music and words, creating an atmosphere of celebration and tenderness. Suddenly, Lean confessed to her friend that she had never known about this holiday before, and she was surprised to hear how much of the academy had remained a mystery to her, which she now wanted to unravel with her new friends. These words deeply upset Karsian because he sincerely hoped to receive cookies from her as a sign of love. And now his heart was filled with bitterness from the realization that his expectations could remain unfulfilled, which added special touchingness to the situation. Realizing that the conversation was becoming too awkward, Leanne quickly changed the subject, asking how many gifts her best friends received that day, since they, like herself, were quite popular and enjoyed the attention of those around the academy. Fjord explained that he had been given many presents, but Karsian, who had been caught last time trying to sneak cookies, had not received any treats yet, which added to his feeling of annoyance and some awkwardness. Innocently, with a slight smile and a soft tone, Leanne explained in detail that despite the strict prohibitions and prohibitive rules of the academy, the students still secretly exchanged small gifts, not noticing how a warm, cozy, and almost magical atmosphere gradually grew in the room. For the surprised Leanne, Karsian continued to be that sweet and gentle cat, whose soft and affectionate appearance hid a strong, formidable tiger, who was always ready at any moment to become her protection from all of life's hardships, trials, and dangers. Fjord, a little embarrassed and scratching the back of his head with his hand, could not understand why his friend so confidently declared that he liked his beloved, because he himself did not yet realize the feelings that had awakened in his soul under the influence of his new acquaintance and her charm. Then Lean suddenly spoke up, suggesting that the boys spend the day without the traditional cookie exchange, as it would be a violation of the strict rules of the academic building, and everyone had to maintain discipline and order for the sake of the common good and peace. Young Karsian grew sad. His cat ears drooped as if clouds had covered the clear sky, and he thought about how difficult it was sometimes to make decisions that went against tradition, even if it was done for the sake of maintaining order and justice. The girl, wrapped in a blanket, looked at him with a soft sadness in her eyes, as if conveying with her gaze all the sadness and tenderness that she felt at that moment, forcing him not to turn away and not to hide his true feelings and experiences. Leanne buried her face in the warm blanket, silently immersed in her own thoughts and confusion, overcome with guilt and confusion, as if she was trying to hide not only from the cold but also from the emotions that were seething in her heart without ceasing. She couldn't understand why there was suddenly an uneasy silence all around, even though there were two people next to her breathing the same air. But at that very moment, it seemed to her that she was left alone in a huge and alien world, full of incomprehensible feelings and fears. Opening one eye, full of melancholy and doubt, the girl decided to look around, not wanting to remain captive to the unknown. And slowly, as if awakening from a deep sleep, she raised her head, trying to comprehend and accept what was happening in this strange and tense silence. In the farthest corner of the soft and cozy sofa, curled up like a sad house kitten, sat her friend with straight silver hair, his gaze downcast and thoughtfully immersed in his thoughts, which so deeply touched her heart and left a mark on her soul. Opening her mouth in amazement and slight shock, Leanne froze in place, looking at his depressed appearance in horror. Because at that moment, her heart sank with a heavy feeling of guilt, as if she had unknowingly become the cause of his pain, loneliness, and silent suffering. And then, unable to bear the overwhelming emotions and, as if wanting to share the pain, Leanne slowly repeated her friend's pose. She hugged her knees with her hands and buried her face in them, hiding her confusion awkwardness, and guilt from the world, as if she wanted to disappear in this gesture. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to Fjord, who is silently, with obvious mischief in his eyes, leaned forward slightly, squinted slyly, and slowly pointed his finger downwards, as if hinting that there was something worthy of special attention hidden under the table. And indeed, right next to her feet stood a small round table, on which a long snow-white plate was neatly placed, as if forgotten or left there on purpose, as if it had been waiting all this time for the right moment to be noticed. When Lian looked a little more closely, she noticed with mild surprise and aching interest that hidden under that very plate was a tiny, neatly tied bag of cookies, a warm, sincere sign of someone's kind attention and care. Fjord, using only sign language and expressive hand movements, tried to convey to Lian a simple but important idea. That with her small but sincere gesture of giving cookies to their friend, she, without realizing it, saved them all from a cold quarrel. Lien, thoughtfully placing her finger to her cheek, was surprised to find herself thinking that these two guys, despite their differences, could be true, devoted friends. And perhaps her action was the first step towards this fragile union. At that moment, that same young man, with deep sadness in his eyes and a trembling, audible in every word of his quiet voice, sat opposite her, his hands folded on his knees as if silently begging her to understand, forgive and accept everything that was hidden in his heart without a single word. The prince of the school still sat alone on his knees by the sofa, his head bowed, as if the whole world had collapsed for him at that moment, and did not make a sound. Only a dark shadow of sadness slowly spreading across his face, like evening fog through the streets of the city. Having made a firm decision to somehow lift his spirits, Lian carefully placed one of the bags of baked goods on the table in front of him, deciding that today was the day to take the first step towards him and try to change something for the better. Without wasting a second, and as if driven by a sudden impulse, Lian rushed to her bag, quickly sorting through the many things, trying to find that very treasured little bag that she had carefully hidden in reserve for just such important and unexpected moments. From the depths of her bag, the girl pulled out a carefully tied bag of cookies, cast a short, sympathetic glance at her sad friend, then, with determination in her eyes, stood up and quickly walked forward, driven by the desire to share warmth. She handed him a tiny but warm from her hands bag of homemade cookies, and Karzian, visibly embarrassed by such an unexpected gesture, slowly raised his gaze to her, which reflected gratitude, mistrust, and a slight, trembling warmth. With a soft, almost radiant smile on her face, Lian explained that she had decided to give him these sweets not for the sake of any hints, but solely as a symbol of their strong and sincere friendship, which meant much more to her than it seemed at first glance. Karsian, clearly not expecting such a touching confession, opened his mouth in surprise, trying to say something in response, but the words, as luck would have it, were slow to form into sentences, and he only looked at the girl in confusion, searching her eyes for confirmation of sincerity and warmth. But suddenly, as if seized by a sudden inspiration and unable to contain his emotions, he jumped up from his seat and, not hiding his surprise and joy, loudly asked again, had she really decided to give these cookies to him as a sign of warmth and friendly sympathy? Lian nodded shyly, and with a small, warm smile that hid both excitement and kindness, she handed him the carefully wrapped sweets, sincerely hoping that this small but important gesture would bring at least a little light into his day and remind him that he was not alone in this world. Young Karsian was a little embarrassed, but nevertheless accepted the new and pleasant gift with gratitude and a warm smile, sincerely appreciating this tender gesture, filled with attention and kindness, which warmed his heart in this difficult moment. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, there was a sharp knock on the door which instantly interrupted the peace and comfortable silence in the room, forcing Fjord, gathering all his strength and will, to quickly get up and open the door. to find out who was knocking with such persistence and determination. Lien noticed how one of the girls, slightly embarrassed and timid, carefully approached the blonde, holding in her hands a carefully wrapped gift. A box of fragrant sweets, which she held out to him with trepidation and hope, hoping for a warm response and a smile. After a short absence, Fjord returned to his friends, explaining with a slight smile that his girlfriends usually didn't come into the common room. But today they were especially bold, which spoke of a change in the atmosphere and the growth of friendships among the students. Lien was shocked when she noticed how many cookies the blonde had collected, a whole mountain, which no longer caused him any care or concern, and he simply threw the bags into the magical portal leading to the storage room, where many of the same sweet gifts were stored. The girl, overcome with genuine shock in not hiding her surprise, asked him in bewilderment how he could agree to such a stupid thing, to throw all the sweets in the trash instead of enjoying them and rejoicing in every bite, because such little things make life brighter and more pleasant. With a sigh, Fjord explained that he couldn't eat all the cookies on his own, and that he suspected that someone might have slipped a love potion into the pastries. So he decided to be careful to avoid any unwanted consequences that could ruin the whole mood. Lien raised her eyebrows in mild indignation, because for her such an act seemed not just wasteful, but almost sacrilegious. After all, in each cookie, as she believed, someone's effort, warmth, and perhaps even a secret feeling were invested. Carcian, lazily leaning against the back of his chair and seeming to savor the moment, couldn't resist a friendly chuckle, remembering how exactly a year ago, Ford had mistakenly given him a whole box of heart-shaped cookies, mistaking him for a girl, which had become a joke in their circle. It was a real shock for sweet Lien to realize that at the moment when the girl was giving sweets to the blonde, her hands were shaking strangely, as if she was experiencing mixed feelings filled with anxiety and embarrassment, which made the situation even more mysterious. The young men suddenly fell silent and turned their heads towards the woman whose voice had interrupted their argument, and their gazes showed a mixture of surprise and anticipation, as no one had expected such an intervention in their conversation, which added intrigue and tension to the situation. With a soft, almost caring smile full of genuine concern, Lien handed Fjord a whole new pack of neatly packaged cookies, assuring him that they were not only fresh, but also completely safe, personally tested by her and worthy of every trust. The blonde stared at the treat in her hands in surprise, frowning in slight confusion, and yet he couldn't help but ask why he was her choice on such a special day, and with what precise intention she did it, because the gesture seemed unexpected to him. With a slight tilt of her head and a soft wink at him, the girl reminded him that today was Cookie Day, adding with a light laugh that there was no hidden hint or secret feeling in this particular pack, and he could enjoy it without fear or inner doubt. Having said this with a slight grace, Lien headed towards the ladies' room, leaving the two young men alone, and at the same moment Carcian, still with a gloomy face and clenching his fists, slowly approached Fjord, his steps sounding threatening, like a menacing preface to a future, unpleasant conversation. As the door behind her began to slowly slam shut, Fjord panicked and tried to scream for his friend to help. But it was too late. Lien was gone, and only he and a growing sense of threat remained in the room, as if the entire world around him had narrowed to just Carcian's gaze. Meanwhile, the young beauty closed the door behind her with a slight smile and looked around the empty corridor with a satisfied look for a few seconds, enjoying the rare silence, not knowing that it was only anticipating the storm that was about to break out behind her gentle back. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew furiously into her face, nearly knocking her off her feet. And at that very moment, behind her, behind the recently closed door, a powerful golden explosion was heard, blinding the interior space and filling the air with a magical roar. Frozen in surprise, young Lien stared at the door that had recently been white, now blackened and covered in cracks, as if something terrible and irreparable had happened inside. something that could not be explained from the point of view of the ordinary mind. In a panic, she remembered an old line from a book on magical theories. If a mage falls into a state of rage, his impulse can be so powerful that it causes an effect similar to an explosion, incinerating everything around in a burst of uncontrollable force. With a quick and decisive step, without looking back, Lien left this ominous place, where the heavy energy of darkness still hovered. She felt how the space itself was permeated with the remnants of dangerous magic, from which she wanted to quickly get away. Away from the room that exuded anxiety and a premonition of disaster. The walls of the academy, with their cool marble and graceful arches under the blue, serene sky, seemed too calm and bright against the backdrop of what was happening in the girl's soul. The contrast between external peace and internal turmoil was becoming almost unbearable. Only a few days had passed, and now Lien, clutching a thick book with bookmarks and neatly straightened corners, was slowly walking home from class, lost in thoughts of her friends, their silence, and the strange tension that seemed to be woven into their every look and word, leaving a residue of anxiety. And suddenly, breaking the silence, a stern professor with a silver monocle sparkling in the rays of the sun loudly announced to the entire audience that today the students would be working in groups, which caused a slight excitement and lively whispering in the class. Lien lowered her head with a sad sigh, not hiding her disappointment, wondering why Teacher George had decided to punish them all with such a task as group work. After all, she hated working in pairs, especially with people she didn't know well. It seemed like a real challenge to her. Professor George, despite his strictness, had a reputation as a knowledgeable mentor. He often captivated students with interesting lectures, talked about rare plants, and taught medical botany with such inspiration that even the laziest began to pay attention. As a result, despite her inner turmoil and slight feeling of uncertainty, Lien found herself in the same group with another girl and an unfamiliar young man, and now all three were sitting at the same table, exchanging cautious glances, as if trying to determine who would be the first to take a step toward starting a conversation. Lien felt awkward and even a little lost in the large group of unfamiliar students, because before she had hardly crossed paths with any of them, had no conversations, and had no opportunity to really get close. Now every glance seemed appraising to her. With a heavy sigh, trying to cope with her growing anxiety, she suddenly caught out of the corner of her ear how one of the young men, turning to the girl next to her, calmly and reservedly said that if she had no one to work with on the project, then she shouldn't worry. He was used to doing everything himself and could handle it just fine on his own. Suddenly, another girl with bright, flaming red hair approached Lien and, with curiosity and a slight worry in her voice, asked if the rumors were true that the beauty had allegedly attracted the attention of the school prince himself, as if wanting to hear an answer that would clear up all doubts. Lien, maintaining her calm and grace, gently and confidently responded that such rumors were completely unfounded and had no factual evidence, noting that these stories were just empty speculation that did not deserve attention and did not affect her real life. However, the other student, clearly not believing Lien's words, constantly glanced furtively at her with an expression of disbelief and condemnation, as if trying to discern at least a drop of truth in her eyes, but was increasingly convinced of the opposite, which caused her to slightly mock. Soon, the girl let out a quiet, caustic laugh, looking away with a disdainful smirk, as if to make it clear that all of Lien's words seemed empty and insignificant to her, not worthy of the slightest attention, and not inspiring any trust. Meanwhile, the young man, having confidently finished drawing a complex diagram on a large board, proudly held up the sheet of paper with the image in front of him and showed it to his groupmates, wanting to receive praise and recognition for the effort and carefully thought out work. The paper depicted a strange structure made of multicolored sticks, and next to it, in large letters, were the names of the project participants and their role in the overall work, emphasizing team spirit and individual contribution. Lien suddenly had a nagging feeling, as if something was wrong with that paper, a secret or a mistake that she couldn't immediately figure out. and that feeling wouldn't leave her, leading her to think about possible trouble or misunderstanding. Carcian, on the contrary, did not have any special feelings for Lian. Their relationship was cold and distant, like two indifferent people standing with their backs to each other, not wanting to see and acknowledge what was really going on between them. Despite this, the sweet girl stubbornly turned a blind eye to the loving glances that involuntarily rushed in her direction. She seemed confused and a little naive, as if not noticing the attention and warmth emanating from one of the guys. The young man himself, whose gaze invariably followed Lian, was a true beauty and aristocrat, intelligent, kind, and charming, like the embodiment of an ideal that many aspired to, but which seemed unattainable for ordinary mortals. Therefore, Lian could not understand why that girl with bright red hair constantly bullied her, not realizing that her belief that the school prince was in love with her was just a figment of her own imagination and delusions. She now had to endure wary glances and the sly, mocking laughter that sounded behind her like a cold wind piercing her soul, making her feel vulnerable and alone in the midst of a crowd of indifferent and critical people. In response to the ridicule and snide glances that were now increasingly directed her way, Lian could not stand it and decided to pay back in the same coin, laughing and teasing her rival, calling her by the ridiculous nickname Potato, in order to somehow protect her dignity and self-esteem. The red-haired student, hearing the insult, instantly blushed with rage and a sense of humiliation. Her eyes flashed with anger, and inside her seethed a desire for revenge and to prove to everyone that she was not as simple as she seemed at first glance. Suddenly, jumping up from her seat, the girl screamed and attacked Lian, accusing her when she calmly turned to the boys across from her, confidently declaring that she knew the perfect place to complete the assignment the professor had given them in class. Young Lian calmly ignored the angry shouts directed at her, mentally repeating to herself the old truth: don't judge a book by its cover. Because appearances and first impressions are often deceiving and do not reflect the true essence of a person. Already in the cozy club room, the girl finally allowed herself to let out her emotions, falling onto the soft sofa and complaining to her friends about how difficult it was to lead the school project, because the responsibility and pressure were much greater than she expected. When the school prince asked her what was wrong, the lovely Lian, in order not to worry him, lied, saying that her leg was just aching. But he, noticing her confusion, became genuinely worried and began to worry, showing genuine concern for her. Her attention was drawn to Carcian's unexpected and somewhat embarrassing offer to give her a massage. And when she turned her head in his direction to answer, the guy suddenly blushed, as if he realized the awkwardness of the moment, and hastened to justify himself, not knowing what to say. Carcian, waving his hands in embarrassment and trying to explain himself, insisted that he had no malicious intent, and that all his actions were sincere but clumsy attempts to show concern, trying to dispel any misunderstanding that might arise between them. At these words, Lian laughed cheerfully, adding with a slight playfulness that she almost repeated his phrase seriously and was even on the verge of agreeing, which gave their conversation a relaxed and light, pleasant atmosphere of mutual understanding. Meanwhile, Fjord, watching their light flirting, grabbed his head and was clearly upset because he quickly got tired of this couple, and he thought with irritation about how tired he was of their endless games and intrigues, not wanting to interfere anymore. Lian's mood suddenly improved, and with a mischievous smile, she told the school prince that she had recently heard many strange and funny rumors about him, which, despite their absurdity, still managed to amuse him and create a light atmosphere of trust between them. Carcian instantly turned pale and asked coldly, with an almost emotionless voice, what rumors exactly she was talking about, trying to understand what could have offended him so much, and why this topic caused such a reaction in him, as if touching on the deepest and most painful memories. Awkwardly lowering her gaze and no longer smiling, Lian replied that it was rumors that she had run into a guy, which gave rise to a lot of gossip and misunderstandings, and she herself could not fully understand where they came from and why they spread so quickly. The young man approached her with interest and caution, as if wanting to support her, and asked if these words had disappointed her, because it was clear that she was hesitating and having difficulty finding the words to explain her feelings, as if she was afraid of revealing too much. Watching her trembling lips and the faint tears, Karsian remembered how he himself sometimes cried, remembering his childhood and those difficult moments after the loss of his parents. And this made him feel a deep connection with Lien, sharing with her the pain and loneliness of the past. Finally gathering her thoughts and overcoming her inner doubts, Lien quietly admitted that she did not want Karsian to have problems or complications in the future related to marriage, caused by rumors and misunderstandings that she was afraid would harm their relationship. The guy, trying to calm her down, asked her not to worry, assuring her that he was not upset at all and that these words would not be able to shake his feelings or plans, because he was confident in the sincerity of their relationship and was ready to support her in any situation. Suddenly, turning to the side, they noticed a stranger enter the room, looking for that very Lien, causing both of them a slight tension and curiosity, because the unknown person could bring both good news and bad news. Gathering all his resolve, Karsian instantly teleported to the door to find out who exactly had come to take his beloved, and what prompted this person to look for Lien at such a late hour, showing all his protective and caring nature. With a slight, almost innocent smile on his lips, he, maintaining a cold and calm tone, persistently asked the incoming student who he was and for what purpose he dared to enter the room, disturbing the peace and creating a tense atmosphere around. Lien stepped forward without hesitation, bravely blocking the new student's path as soon as he entered the hallway, as she didn't want her impulsive and fearsome friend to frighten the boy with his intimidating appearance. Approaching her lover and looking closely at the confused newcomer's face, the girl suddenly realized with a slight shadow of surprise that standing before her was none other than her former partner from a recent, painfully drawn-out group project. The unfortunate boy, having barely caught sight of the menacing figure of his school prince, suddenly turned pale, screamed, and, tripping over his own feet, fell to the floor with a crash, trembling with fear before the one who so jealously guarded his beloved. Seeing how the poor student was trembling, young Lien hastened to calm her good boyfriend, gently placing her hand on his shoulder and asking him not to be rude to the guest, because she still had an unfinished conversation with this man that required delicacy. Realizing that he had gone too far, he restrained his anger, took a deep breath, and, replacing his anger with mercy, reluctantly agreed to give in, submitting to the gentle voice of his girlfriend, in whom he immensely valued wisdom and patience in any situation. The beauty, smiling reservedly and trying not to show her excitement, turned to another student, politely reminding him that, according to their preliminary and very clear agreement, they were supposed to meet a little later, a few hours after the end of club activities. However, suddenly, the boy, still sitting on the cold floor, screamed loudly, clutching his head with trembling hands, and complained that his head ached terribly, as if someone with invisible hands had squeezed it in a vice, and the pain was unbearably pulsating in his temples. Understanding, sensitive, and reasonable Lien immediately came to the sensible conclusion that in such a depressed and sick state, he absolutely should not have come here with them, but it would be wiser to stay at home, rest, and take the necessary medications. The young man readily, almost with relief, agreed with her opinion and hastily retreated as far away from them as possible, especially because he was terrified of the jealous and frightening school prince, whose eerie gaze, as if from the darkness itself, was constantly directed straight at him. Silently, with a slight sadness in her eyes and unspoken anxiety on her lips, the girl watched as the frightened young man, leaning on his hands and knees, backed away and, almost crawling, quickly disappeared down the corridor, moving away from her outstretched goodwill. Not noticing anything suspicious, alarming, or threatening in her interlocutor's behavior, Lien said goodbye to the other student calmly and reservedly, smiling softly as she left, as if there was not a drop of tension or hidden misunderstanding between them. However, after a short moment, when the corridor was empty, sweat appeared on her face. Anger boiled in her chest, and she screamed furiously, as if she suddenly realized with a painful epiphany the obvious. Perhaps the young man was not suffering at all, but simply did not want to work with them on the same team. Clutching her head with both hands, the girl cried out in a breaking voice that she had been too kind and naive to allow herself to be deceived so easily, and, judging by her despair, the feeling of stupidity, shame, and resentment burned through her from within with terrifying force. A new morning had dawned. A clear blue sky stretched over the academy. The rays of the soft sun illuminated the snow-white facades of the buildings, and in this morning calm there was no trace of yesterday's rage, no echo of internal turmoil. At the dormitory, Lian's friend was already waiting for her. She was sitting at a neat table in the common room, concentrating on her important and urgent matters, almost not noticing how the door behind her slowly and silently opened. To the girl's tired and slightly distracted look, Lian briefly and calmly replied that she had come here for literally 1 short minute to clarify an important question related to the recent incident, and then she was going to finish her schoolwork and have some time alone. Suddenly, Jane carefully and quietly handed the lovely Lian 2 neatly folded, slightly yellowed letters that had just arrived, addressed to her dear friend, as if conveying an important and sensitive message that required immediate attention and care. Lian carefully took the outstretched papers with a slight smile of sincere gratitude, softly thanking Jane for her care and attention, feeling a lively curiosity awaken in her soul, and a slight but pleasant excitement from the upcoming reading and unexpected news. The girl herself slowly approached the table, feeling a slight excitement and warmth growing in her chest, because she already knew for sure that both letters came from her dear aunt, with whom she had always had a special connection, filled with tender warmth and mutual understanding. On the wax seal that adorned one of the letters, a familiar emblem from childhood shone in crimson wax, a proud eagle with wide-spread wings, a symbol of strength, honor, and dignity, which always reminded her of her family roots and childhood questions. Once upon a time, when Lian was still a small child, she sat on the lap of her kind aunt and with unflagging curiosity asked her about different birds and was especially interested in the name of the noble bird depicted on their family coat of arms. Now, with the letters in her hands and a slight smile on her lips, she carefully unfolded one of them. But before she began to read, she already knew for sure that she would definitely answer her aunt a little later, when she calmed down, collected all the necessary thoughts, and wrote something sincere, bright, and truly kind in response. Moreover, the letters emanated a delicate and pleasant aroma of fresh lavender, which seemed to envelop the entire space around with a light coolness and awaken the warmest, brightest, and calmest memories in the depths of the soul, giving a feeling of peace. Jane turned in surprise to her roommate, who suddenly became strangely and unexpectedly silent, as if something mystical and mysterious had captured her attention, causing her to hold her breath in anticipation of something important or slight excitement. Lian, not paying much attention to the reactions of those around her and smiling slightly to herself, calmly tossed the received letter into a neat stack of already accumulated messages, as if postponing the important decision about when exactly the right time had come to immerse herself in their meaningful and exciting content. However, Jane suddenly turned to her friend with surprise and slight bewilderment and asked with genuine interest why she still hadn't opened a single letter, since everyone had long wanted to know what was hidden behind these messages. Lian took a deep breath, waved her hand slightly towards the writing drawer, ran her fingers gently over its surface, and briefly but firmly replied that these messages were not really worth reading, because there was nothing important in them. With her hand, she slowly closed the drawer of neatly folded dresses she had just looked into, as if drawing an invisible line between the past and the present, allowing the memories to fade away with the quiet click of the lid. The entire Lian group, tired of meaningless and stupid tasks, refused to take up this matter. And so she resolutely set out alone to investigate the task set before them, wanting to find the answer on her own and not waste time. Over the weekend, none of the girls contacted Lian, who diligently completed her homework, immersing herself in her work and trying not to be distracted by idle chatter and unnecessary chores that could only interfere with her concentration. And then, unexpectedly, that same guy approached her. The student who had previously drawn the diagram of the assignment and quickly ran away. But now, smiling and waving his hand in greeting, he appeared in front of her again, as if wanting to start a new dialogue or share some important information. The girl looked at him attentively and thoughtfully. With a slight sadness and warmth in her voice, she carefully asked if his former lover had once been his grandfather's grandmother, trying to understand the complex family ties and tangled, multi-layered relationships. Embarrassed, Hans, blushing a little, hesitantly rubbing the back of his head with his hand and avoiding eye contact, nodded in agreement, honestly admitting that this story was indeed very complex and multi-layered, like dark memories, confusing and painful for him. Moving a little closer to her and carefully placing his hand on the edge of the desk, he began to explain that his grandparents were divorced, and therefore their family had complex and tense relationships that left their mark on all relatives. After that, he continued to speak with some thoughtfulness and regret in his voice, that it was probably really hard and difficult for her to do all the work together with another person, as if taking on the responsibilities of 4 people at once, which inevitably created a lot of tension. To which Lean lazily and slightly contemptuously waved her hand, confidently answering that no, she did all the work completely on her own, and that's why she only wrote down her name there, and the name of her other friend wasn't even mentioned in the lists, and didn't appear even once. It turned out that the red-faced, impudent, and rather vindictive girl's name was Amila. She was the one who had previously bullied Lian and many other classmates, displaying unpleasant, cruel, and hardly deserved insolence and hostility. The young man felt a heavy burden of guilt and a deep awareness that he was the only one who had actually completed the task. But this was clearly not enough to correct the entire situation and relieve the oppressive tension in the group. Lian explained with a slight chuckle that she considered Amila a heavy talker because she talked too much, interrupted everyone, and made it difficult to concentrate, which is why working together turned into constant bickering and quarrels. Sitting closer to her with slight awkwardness and a little shyness, Han spoke, remembering that he had seen her before with that girl with short blonde hair, and carefully and with interest clarified whether they were real friends and whether they maintained a close, sincere relationship. Lovingly and a little timidly, he began to dream about Jane, tenderly saying that she had an unusually beautiful and memorable name that sounded like music, and she herself seemed to him a real source of light, joy, and carefree fun. He literally dreamed and secretly hoped to meet her, imagining how one day he would be able to talk to such a cheerful, happy, and truly sweet girl who always knew how to lift the spirits and give warmth to her loved ones and those around her. Coldly and sternly, Lian ordered the guide to leave immediately. Her piercing gaze made it clear that she noticed how he began to stare too long and intently at her kind and closest friend, which was completely unacceptable for her. However, Hans, despite the strict refusal, did not give up and persistently began to ask her to introduce him to sweet Jane, explaining that this was his cherished dream, a sincere desire and a great hope, which he carefully kept in his heart for many long months, striving to finally get closer to the one who was so dear to him. At that very moment, a heavy folder containing important documents slammed loudly as someone threw it abruptly and, it seemed, with irritation, onto the table where spilled ink lay nearby. The sharp sound of the impact seemed to emphasize the growing tension of the situation, causing a slight uneasiness in the air. Lean froze in surprise when she heard the professor's response, which, with obvious severity and categoricalness, stated that her report was completely unsatisfactory and did not meet the minimum requirements for academic work. The girl, a little confused, replied that she didn't understand why the teacher wasn't satisfied with her work, to which the teacher responded even more sternly and categorically that even a report on weeds in the yard would have been valued much higher than her current work, hinting at serious gaps and shortcomings. The girl reminded the teacher with a slight reproach that shouldn't they have collected the magical plants themselves, analyzed them in detail, and then systematized them and written a comprehensive report reflecting all the work done and its results? The man replied sternly and uncompromisingly that this was precisely why he had decided to divide them into groups, so that everyone could contribute. And now he was absolutely sure that the grade had been given correctly. Her report was clearly unsatisfactory and required serious revision. This answer caused the girl obvious dissatisfaction and irritation, because almost none of her classmates helped collect the herbs, and the plants that she did receive possessed rare magical powers and had special properties that required careful study. With a stern and determined expression, she began to resist the harsh accusations, insisting that no one had provided her with any assistance and that she had written the entire report entirely on her own, putting into it the maximum amount of effort and knowledge she possessed. Then the professor, beaming at his desk and clearly not believing her words, pointed to the third page of the document, as if checking whether the girl could explain or confirm what was written there, causing a feeling of slight irritation and tension in her. The woman responded with a stern, confident expression that this was indeed the case. She had personally collected this rare plant, carefully and meticulously studying its characteristics, features, and properties, and so had decided to write about it in detail, drawing on her own observations, experience, and knowledge. The professor then objected with some skepticism that scientists had only officially discovered the amazing healing properties of this plant a couple of days ago, so he seriously doubted how she could have learned about it before them, and included the information in her report without confirmed scientific data. After which, with a stern, serious tone to his voice, the teacher noted that they had not yet covered the section on the healing properties of chestnut, and therefore it was unlikely that she could know and describe these characteristics with the necessary accuracy and scientific justification. Awkwardly lowering her gaze and feeling slightly embarrassed, the girl realized that her usual modesty and wisdom had this time turned against her, becoming a serious mistake that now prevented her from openly declaring herself and her truly profound knowledge. In the room stood a tall, massive wooden cabinet filled with dusty old books and ancient tomes that seemed to hold the secrets of the distant past and the answers to all the most important and difficult questions that Leon had not yet dared to voice even to herself. In the end, Leon gathered all her courage and decided to honestly tell the professor the truth, realizing that it was no longer possible to hide the real state of affairs, and that only complete openness and sincerity could help her find understanding and support, even if it was very difficult and required great courage. The reason was that she had previously not stood out among other students, had not boasted about her knowledge and skills, because she did not want to seem arrogant or haughty, preferring to remain quietly in the shadows and not attract unnecessary attention to herself. If she had come out earlier, she might have been sent straight to graduate school. But Lynn didn't want that, as they were conducting horrible and dangerous experiments, and she was afraid to face such trials that could harm her soul and health. Lean waved her hand and began to explain that she was not aware of the official discovery of the healing properties of this plant, but at the same time she had been familiar with its healing qualities since childhood, since she herself had once discovered them while experimenting with the flower. The teacher, folding his hands in front of him and looking attentively at Leon, was clearly amazed by her answer and the depth of her knowledge, which turned out to be unexpected, much more extensive and detailed than he had expected, causing him sincere respect and genuine surprise. Lian then openly admitted that at that time she did not yet know that the flower in question was usually used exclusively for decorative purposes, and only very recently scientists began to seriously and thoroughly study its medicinal properties and potential possibilities in medicine. With a spark of keen interest in his eyes, the professor suddenly turned to her with a question about the properties of another plant, intending to test her knowledge and ability to accurately recognize, describe, and explain the unique characteristics of different species in order to better understand how deeply she understood the subject. Lian thought for a moment, concentrating and carefully considering the question, and then confidently and calmly answered that she used this rare plant to improve blood circulation and maintain overall tone of the body, based on her own extensive experience and careful observations. The teacher was genuinely impressed by such a well-thought-out answer, folded his hands on the table and smiled thoughtfully, quietly admiring her extensive knowledge and recognizing her as one of the best and most promising students in her class, which significantly increased her confidence and respect among her classmates. Realizing that Lian was truly wise, responsible, and had a much better grasp of the material than many others, the teacher finally agreed to improve her grade to a high excellent, and noticeably changed his attitude toward her, now viewing her as a serious, talented, and capable student with great potential. With a smile on her face, Lian was about to say goodbye and leave, feeling a slight sense of relief and joy. But at that moment, the teacher's stern voice stopped her, as if reminding her that the lesson was not over yet and there was still much to learn and understand. With a sweet smile and a friendly, warm glint in his eyes, the teacher offered to let her study with him personally, promising to generously share his deep knowledge and wisdom, as well as help her unlock her full potential in science, magic, and life's challenges. Without thinking long and doubting internally, the girl suddenly rushed to run away, loudly slamming the heavy door behind her, deciding that she did not want to learn from anyone, preferring to go her own way and not depend on anyone in her further development and choice. The professor, holding her report in his hands, smiled quietly and laughed to himself, already making detailed and cunning plans in his mind on how to make her his student and how to help her blossom and achieve greater success in her studies and life. Soft snow-white clouds floated smoothly above the bright blue, endless sky. Loud shouts and noises could be heard in the distance on the street, and the entire life of the academy continued to boil, creating an atmosphere of constant movement, change, and new amazing discoveries. Within the majestic walls of the academy, all the important events took place, where the destinies of students and wise teachers intertwined. Bold dreams were formed, and the destinies of future generations were forged. Filled with knowledge, trials, ambitions, and hopes. From then on, the professor gradually and persistently began asking the girl to answer his questions more often and confidently during lectures, showing a sincere interest in her opinions and knowledge, and also wanting to stimulate her active participation and development in the educational process. Hans, however, without letting up and without losing a drop of hope, constantly ran after her everywhere, persistently begging her to introduce him to Jane, sincerely hoping that she could help him get closer to the one who had long and firmly occupied his thoughts, heart, and cherished dreams. Standing by the cold wall in the long, almost endless corridor, Lian thought to herself thoughtfully and with a slight smile that perhaps her academic life was slowly but surely beginning to improve, and she was already feeling the first, all-important signs of inner confidence, strength, and personal growth. Suddenly, as if appearing out of nowhere, Hans appeared from around the corner and quietly, timidly, a little embarrassedly asked her if she could arrange his long-awaited meeting with Jane on the weekend and, perhaps, help him start a conversation with her or establish first contact. Lian yelled loudly and sharply at Hans, with obvious irritation and fatigue in her voice, expressing her dissatisfaction with the fact that he demanded too much from her and was too persistent in clinging to her sweet and kind friend. not leaving her a moment of peace and personal space. Their quarrel was suddenly interrupted by the lovely Jane, who was quietly peeping at them from behind the opposite wall, observing the tense situation with anxiety mixed with uncertainty and some confusion, not knowing what to do. The girl was in complete shock and thought to herself that Lien must have had a new boyfriend because sweat suddenly appeared on her face. Perhaps from excitement, stress, or the sudden change of emotions that were seething inside her at this very tense and unexpected moment. The inevitable and alarming thing had arrived. Lien, with dramatic determination in her voice, almost solemnly exclaimed that she was now officially waging war against school exams, which had become real enemies for her, causing sleepless nights and gloomy thoughts. Nearby, on dusty wooden shelves, books stood neatly stacked, old, wise, and long-suffering, like silent witnesses to her upcoming battle. Filled with knowledge, theories, spells, and pages that she would have to learn in a matter of days. Meanwhile, the stubborn and restless Hans still did not calm down and continued to persistently pester Lien, constantly begging her to introduce him to Jane, completely unaware of how overloaded with preparation and mentally exhausted she was now. Sighing in irritation and barely able to contain her irritation, the girl sharply shouted at him, demanding that he concentrate on the upcoming exams and stop bothering her with his obsessive requests about her friend, who was also having a hard time right now. Suddenly, the beautiful Lien, with a mysterious half-smile on her face, suddenly declared that she had only one question for him, and, to his surprise, Hans agreed without hesitation, assuring her that he was ready to answer everything she wanted to know. Then came that strange and almost absurd moment when she asked him to choose whether he would prefer to pick tomatoes from the ground or, conversely, pick soil from tomatoes, as if testing his sense of logic or absurd humor. Hans, completely confused and completely at a loss, asked again with obvious uncertainty in his voice why this strange and, in his opinion, completely pointless question was even necessary, since he saw neither logic nor purpose in it, deciding that Lien was simply making fun of him. However, after collecting his thoughts and scratching his head slightly, he still gave an answer, stating that he would probably choose the tomato-flavored soil. To which Lien, with cold indifference and restrained severity, noted that this was absolutely the wrong choice, and therefore he was immediately considered disqualified. Stunned, confused, and lost, Hans stood frozen in place, not understanding what exactly he had done wrong, and the next second, the heavy door in front of him slammed shut, with a loud click and a dry echo, as if putting an end to his attempt to get closer to Lien. The girl thought about what had happened and came to the conclusion that in this strange test, the main thing was not the choice at all, but taste. Because it was precisely this unexpected answer that Jane had once given, which meant that Hans was completely unsuitable for her in terms of perception and worldview. Her best friend immediately noticed her arrival with loud surprise as soon as Lien crossed the threshold, and immediately asked who she had been walking down the corridor with earlier. But she, not wanting to go into unnecessary details and reveal the true essence of what had happened, calmly and without a shadow of a trace of excitement, lied. After a brief conversation, the two of them headed to a bright classroom for another theoretical lecture, where they unexpectedly began a conversation about discipline, accounting rules, and, as it turned out, a rather complex and confusing topic concerning the basics of accounting. Upset and a little distracted, Jane confided to her friend that her answer on the test was completely different from the professor's, to which Lien grinned and said that perhaps teachers should be taught more often, just like the students themselves. Walking together down the long corridor of the academy, bathed in soft daylight, the girls animatedly discussed their studies and exchanged ideas about the possible addition of extra classes during the summer holidays, which, as it turned out, suddenly took on great importance. Lian unexpectedly admitted, with rare sincerity, that this whole story with extra classes caused her more disappointment than joy, which surprised Jane quite a bit, because she was used to seeing in her friend resilience, unbending persistence, and a readiness to face any difficulties. A little later, during a quiet conversation between the next classes, Lian finally opened up a little deeper and explained that the issue wasn't the classes themselves, but that she would have to stay at the academy for the entire vacation period because she wouldn't be able to go home, despite the warm anticipation of her family and her longing for home. With genuine warmth in her voice, Jane promised her friend that she would write her letters as often as possible, so that Lian would not feel too lonely, would not get bored, and could feel that someone was thinking about her, even if they were far apart. After a short but touching farewell, the girls waved goodbye to each other, and Lynn headed towards the clubroom, full of hope that she would be able to spend her time usefully, and, grabbing the door handle, took a deep breath. Suddenly, having barely reached the door of the clubroom, Lian stopped in surprise, hearing two familiar voices behind the closed door, belonging to her old friends, young men with whom she had many common memories and slight misunderstandings. The beauty, hearing strange sounds behind the door, hesitated for a moment, not knowing whether to enter the room, because her heart sank with an anxious premonition, as if something mysterious was already waiting for her beyond the threshold, hiding in the semi-darkness and silence. Her hand froze on the cold metal door handle, as if the steel itself had absorbed her hesitation. Lian did not dare either enter or retreat, as if an unknown inner voice was carefully whispering that something unexpected might await her behind this door. Something capable of turning the usual course of the day upside down. Nevertheless, overcoming her uncertainty and determined not to show even a hint of confusion, she took a deep breath, straightened up, politely apologized for her lateness, quietly pushed the door open, and walked inside, trying to look calm and collected, although her heart was pounding anxiously in her chest. There, in the soft semi-darkness of the clubroom, that same mysterious school prince was already waiting for her. A silent and mysterious young man about whom everyone in the area had long been whispering, believing that he harbored secret feelings for Lian. And now he greeted her with unexpected brightness, almost solemnly. Hesitantly wiping sweat from her forehead, a confused Lian couldn't resist asking her friend with genuine bewilderment why Fjord, one of her classmates, was stuck on the ceiling, as if stuck there by magic or a recent prank. And suddenly the guy hanging on the ceiling and shaking with tension looked very uncomfortable. But Carcian lied with a slight smile, explaining that he was simply tired and decided to take a little nap in an unusual place to restore his strength. Fjord hung there, as if frozen, with his arms hanging down, trembling not from fear, but clearly forced to stay in this uncomfortable position, as if someone had magically forced him there, depriving him of the opportunity to descend on his own and relieve his condition. Using his magical abilities, Carcian deftly and with a touch of mockery tangled his friend with the ground, as if putting him to sleep, and then, with lively interest and a barely concealed mischievous smile, asked if Fjord had been able to rest well in such an unusual and, to put it mildly, extremely inconvenient place. Fjord couldn't answer right away, slowly raised his head and saw Lian in front of him, after which he smiled tiredly and wearily, as if in her familiar face he had momentarily found the comfort and support he needed to survive this unpleasant ordeal. The three of them animatedly discussed the upcoming exams, going into detail about the reasons for their lateness, each person's level of preparation, and plans for retaking them, sincerely sharing their worries and hoping for success in the upcoming trials, as if uniting in the face of the upcoming difficulties. Unlike his friend, Carcian confidently stated that he had passed all the exams without any problems, thanks not only to his natural talent, but also to his diligent preparation, which earned him respect and a touch of envy from the other participants in the conversation. After all, this guy truly possessed genius abilities in magic, which allowed him to easily and gracefully cast the most complex and sophisticated spells, while others had to spend long hours and a lot of effort to get close to his level of mastery. The handsome and sweet Fjord, in turn, admitted that his own specialization was not related to magic, but to fencing and combat techniques. And it was in this area that he felt most confident and prepared. To everyone's surprise, it turned out that Fjord passed the exams without even putting in any special effort or writing them in the traditional way, since his knowledge and skills were automatically credited, recognizing his mastery without unnecessary formalities. With horror and a heavy feeling, Lien realized that out of the three of them, she was the only one left who would have to take the exams. And this thought, like a dark cloud, hung over her, making her heart beat faster and filling her soul with anxiety and doubt. The boys, upon hearing this news, seemed paralyzed by shock, frozen in place, amazed and confused. Because now it became clear that until Lien passed all the necessary exams, she would not be able to attend their club and participate in common affairs, which created an unexpected and painful distance between them. At that moment, the candy hit the floor with a loud slap, breaking the silence and creating a sense of awkward silence, as if the library itself, an ancient building with massive stone walls of the academy, was frozen in anticipation of further events. It was an ancient library building, the massive stone walls of an academy, holding within them centuries of wisdom and knowledge, creating an atmosphere of calm and concentration for everyone who crossed its threshold. With her glasses on and her hair neatly tied into a bun, Lien picked up an antique fountain pen and prepared to study diligently for the upcoming exams, throwing herself into her studies with determination and focus, as if her entire fate depended on this knowledge. Across from her sat Karshan, smiling and leisurely reading an ancient scroll which only added to the sense of mystery and importance of the moment, as if they were both connected by an invisible thread of study in the pursuit of perfection. The maiden asked with a touch of irony what this prince and genius was doing here, to which he, with a feigned seriousness, replied that he was studying, although from the expression on his face and the strange way he held the scroll, it was clear that he was only playing the role of a student, and had clearly lied this time. Resting his head on his hand with a playful smile and slightly raising an eyebrow, Karsian confidently replied that he could even read an upside-down book, as if demonstrating his unrivaled dexterity and skill, which immediately caused a slight and sincere smile to appear on Lien's face, his fingers playing lightly and casually on the armrest. He began to explain in detail the basics of mana, its various types, properties, and effects on the body, and also told them about the sinister and dangerous monsters associated with this magical resource, immersing them both in a fascinating and educational story. Lien, in response, pointed her pen at him, laughing slightly and jokingly noting that he was not looking at the book at all, but was devoting all his attention exclusively to her, as if he had forgotten about the subject of the conversation and was completely focused on a much more interesting and close interlocutor. Bringing his face close to hers, with a barely noticeable playful smile, Karsian seductively whispered a question, not hiding a slight excitement and desire. Whether he managed to charm her and cause a tremor in her heart, making Lien involuntarily smile and feel a warm, tender excitement inside herself. After everything that had happened, the boy, smiling slyly and mysteriously, offered to teach her what now seemed incomprehensible and complex, assuring her that if she sincerely wanted to comprehend this knowledge, then everything would definitely become clear and easy, like playing on the strings of the soul. Watching the other students search in vain for the necessary information, wandering fruitlessly between the shelves and scrolls, the girl finally decided to agree to his offer, trusting him, although deep down a shadow of doubt and uncertainty still lurked. Through the window of the spacious library, bathed in soft light, an endless view of a cloudless, clear blue sky opened up, as if inviting her into a world of new knowledge and discoveries, filling the room with a lightness and freshness that inspired her not to give up in the face of difficulties. Sitting at the heavy oak desk, staring at the paper with attention and trying to understand why this particular boy was so diligently and sincerely helping her with her studies, Leanne felt both curiosity and slight anxiety, not understanding what was driving his actions. Disturbing images were already flashing through her mind, of how the boy's strict parents might punish her, accusing her of somehow bewitching their son, which made her heart clench and filled her soul with the coldness of upcoming trials and misunderstandings. Suddenly, a guy quietly appeared behind her and asked, with mild interest, what the girl was thinking about at that moment, as if trying to penetrate the depths of her thoughts, which were hidden behind her imperturbable expression and slight thoughtfulness. With a smile and a light laugh, Leanne joked that she hadn't really been thinking about anything, but had simply looked at his handsome face, and at that moment all her worries and thoughts suddenly disappeared, as if they had dissolved into thin air, leaving only a slight feeling of peace. Her words confused and at the same time charmed the young man, who suddenly felt his heart beat slightly faster, and his eyes filled with a warm light, as if his presence was something significant and valuable to her. Although she could not always express it in words, Leanne lightly nudged her friend with her hand, adding with a smile that it was thanks to him that she was able to distract herself and forget about all the trifles and problems that had recently seemed so important, but now seemed like just insignificant details in the huge world around her. The setting of the ducal castle, with its large, spacious halls and snow-white walls that seemed to reflect light and nobility, gave it a special charm, creating an atmosphere of grandeur and inspiration, where every detail had its own meaning and beauty. A noblewoman in an elegant dress, chatting with the butler in a quiet corner, discussed the latest rumors that had quickly spread throughout the academy about the mysterious son of their noble family, whose talent and behavior had attracted the attention of all the students and teachers. The blonde woman, who turned out to be his mother, said with a slight smile that it was surprising and amusing how her son had suddenly begun to show a special interest in girls, which had caused considerable discussion and speculation in the narrow circles of the aristocracy. She was a truly beautiful and famous lady. Her name was Sylvia, and she also held the important position of director of the academy, which made her figure even more influential and respected among all who studied or worked within these walls. The girl turned sullenly to her friend, observing his strange behavior after she announced that she would not be going to their shared club for now. And from that moment on, Carcian constantly walked next to her, smiling and not letting go of her for a single step, as if afraid of losing her. Now Carcian seemed to have become her shadow. He followed her everywhere, always smiling, showing unusual persistence and care, which made Leanne feel both protected and a little worried about his excessive attention. The girl was alarmed by such intense and unusual attention because Carcian literally never left her side. He even walked into the women's dormitory with her, seemingly oblivious to boundaries and other people's space, which caused Leanne anxiety and slight irritation. With an angry, irritated tone in her voice, Leanne sharply rebuked her neighbor, reminding her that her friend had no right to appear so freely where she did not live alone, and emphasized that the neighbor could well have resisted such an intrusion by showing persistence in protecting her personal space. The young man did not answer a word, but only smiled slyly, as if he knew something important that remained hidden from her, and this mysterious smile increased her confusion and the feeling that she was missing something, but could not understand what exactly. Jane was slightly embarrassed by the gentleman's words, but, noticing his sincere apology to herself, she tried to calm the situation, gently objecting that, in fact, nothing terrible had happened, and there was no need to worry or fret about it. Leanne turned to her friend with slight irritation and discontent, reminding her that it was not at all necessary to be friendly and nice to the school prince, since a relationship with him could only turn into unnecessary complications and worries for her. Ultimately, Realizing that power and control in this situation were clearly not on her side, the girl sighed heavily, feeling powerless, and admitted that, unfortunately, nothing could be changed, and she would simply have to come to terms with this circumstance. With her soft and gentle hand, Lien carefully touched the guy's hand, as if trying to convey support and trust through this light and subtle contact, while at the same time causing Carcian slight confusion and embarrassment with her unexpected touch. After this tender gesture, she explained, a little awkwardly, that they had planned to go to the club room together, trying to smooth over the pause that had arisen and maintain the light atmosphere between them. Although inside she felt a slight nervousness and uncertainty. Suddenly, the guy turned Lien's head to the side with his hand, gently warning her not to bother him with such unexpected touches anymore. Because now he was not only her friend, but also felt responsible for her. Which caused the girl surprise and slight confusion. Carcian, gently hugging her shoulders as if preparing her for the upcoming transition teleport, smiled softly and confidently promised that together they would overcome all obstacles. And this warm support filled Lien with peace and confidence in the future. The guy's face was bright red with excitement, and his heart was pounding wildly, as if in anticipation, because his beloved was so close that it seemed he could feel her breath and warmth, filling the space around him with special tenderness and trepidation. Trustingly and calmly, Lien buried her face in his strong shoulder, returning his embrace and gently hugging him, as if trying to convey the full depth of her feelings and the confidence that this moment would forever remain in their memory as a symbol of sincere love. A light and pleasant scent of rose emanated from him, a delicate flower that seemed to envelop them both in a subtle trail of fragrance, filling the atmosphere around with warmth and peace, as if time had slowed down, allowing them to enjoy every moment. Her fingers glided softly over the fabric of his uniform, as if exploring every fold, every curve, expressing through her touch a deep affection and tenderness that could not be expressed in words, but which was felt with all her heart. Fjord, watching this touching and sincere scene, froze in amazement. His eyes widened in surprise and shock, because he did not expect to see such closeness and warmth between them, which made him internally think about his own feelings and experiences. Watching his friends embrace tenderly, Fjord calmly asked quietly and with a slight smile what they were doing in the middle of the room. Clearly trying to understand the meaning of their closeness, but at the same time trying not to show his surprise and slight confusion. As soon as they found themselves in the cramped room of the club, Lien quickly and a little shyly moved away from the guy, as if trying to regain distance and not give anyone any extra reasons for questions. Although in her heart she felt a little awkward and funny at the same time. Then, smiling and trying to ease the tension, she explained to her friend that they had just used teleportation, and in order for the magic to work properly and without failure, they had to touch each other. Otherwise, everything could go wrong. With a touch of friendly mockery, the boy teased his close friends, gently inviting them to go outside for some fresh air to show their affection and hug, since here, within the walls of the academy, they were required to focus entirely on their studies and serious tasks, and not on trivial pranks. Then, with a light click of the book on the table, he made a sharp sound, as if calling for the prince of the school to cheer up and come to his senses, commanding with confidence and firmness, which instantly attracted the attention of those around him and made everyone feel the tension of the moment. To everyone's great surprise, Carcian silently lowered his head and quietly, without any words, walked away, his shoulders drooping, and as if immersed in his own dark thoughts. Without explaining the reasons for his behavior, and leaving everyone in a state of slight confusion and anxiety. Having noticed her friend's strange and unusual behavior, the girl asked Fjord in a cautious, distant voice what was going on with their comrade. to which he only briefly replied that he was going to take a cold shower, avoiding detailed explanations and leaving the questions unanswered. The surprised beauty, with bewilderment and slight excitement in her eyes, could not understand why her friend suddenly decided to take a cold shower, as if there was some hidden reason behind his decision that was very difficult for her to understand and accept without an explanation. Fjord, visibly embarrassed and confused, did not know how to explain to the girl such intimate and personal details of his sex life with dignity and care, trying to find the right words so as not to embarrass her even more and maintain trust. Realizing that the conversation might take an awkward turn and not wanting to go into details, the boy, with a slight smile, decided to lie to Lian, explaining that perhaps he accidentally spilled something on himself, thereby trying to avoid awkward questions and maintain an atmosphere of lightness and ease. Settling down on the soft sofa next to him, Lian began a leisurely conversation with interest and goodwill, during which the two discussed their educational plans, shared impressions, and told each other which subjects and disciplines they particularly liked and were interested in. The girl, with a slight smile and a hint of sadness, noted that Fjord had always been special. He never indulged in the clubroom, avoided fights and the thoughtless use of magic, preferring to immerse himself in books and scientific works in solitude and with enthusiasm, which made his image especially attractive and mysterious. The guy explained in a simple and casual manner that his friend's actions had given her the wrong impression of him, but in reality, he was trying his best to get high grades and prove his seriousness in his studies and life. Covering herself with a soft blanket, the girl suddenly spoke in a quiet voice, admitting that she had heard very little about the blonde and was now genuinely interested in how he was doing in the academic building, wanting to learn more about him and dispel all her doubts. The boy, turning the pages of the book, began to tell how the blonde occupies a place in the top 5 magicians of the academy, but at the same time constantly strives for greater success and does not intend to stop there, demonstrating true determination. Lian noted that this young man's manner of speech was much more educated and convincing than that of their mutual friend with red hair, which inspired respect in her and awakened an interest in further communication and friendship. After a sincere and warm smile, the girl warned that he should be especially careful, because there were many different rumors and gossips circulating around the school prince, which could both damage his reputation and confuse the person himself in his own story, creating confusion and mistrust. Fjord wanted to respond to her words, but suddenly fell silent, sensing the ambiguity of her statement, as if he was thinking that not everything was as simple as it seemed at first glance, and that behind this external simplicity, there were many more riddles and secrets that were worth unraveling. He then asked her sullenly whether she really thought the prince of the school was a good man, and Lian, lying on the sofa, calmly and confidently answered in the affirmative, showing that her opinion was not so superficial, but thoughtful and balanced, based on a deep understanding of character. Having made herself comfortable on the sofa, the girl asked to be woken up in 23 minutes. After which she almost immediately fell into a light and restful sleep, as if deciding to rest for a while and recuperate in order to continue her journey with renewed vigor. A surprised Fjord, with his head buried in his hand, leaned against the wall covered with books, sitting at the table in thought and silence, as if immersed in his own thoughts and experiences, which did not give him peace for a moment. It was even more amazing to watch how quickly Lian fell asleep, hugging her arms and tucking her legs comfortably under a soft pink blanket, her face glowing with calm and tenderness, as if the very atmosphere around her was filled with warmth and peace. Sitting at the table and immersed in his own thoughts, he tried to understand why Lian did not notice how her friend was secretly and sincerely in love with her, because his feelings were deep and sincere, although she remained focused on her thoughts and deeds. The girl was far from stupid or naive. On the contrary, she was intelligent and insightful, sometimes displaying harshness and at other times gentleness and education, which made her personality multifaceted and interesting to those around her. With her gentle smile that shone like the rays of the morning sun, and an inner light that radiated kindness and sincerity, Lian was far from just a student. She was a unique and inimitable individual with a rich, multifaceted inner world and a complex character. The young man took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of surprise and slight sadness in his chest, trying to understand his own feelings and the reasons why his friend had so quickly and completely fallen in love with the new student, whose mystery and charm drew the hearts of those around her like magnets. Carcian deliberately began to carefully hide his dark and cruel character traits in order to make a good impression on the sweet Lian, trying to appear caring and gentle, despite internal contradictions and deep feelings that are sometimes difficult to control. The three of them spent a lot of time together, and the prince of the school stayed by Lian's side, gently and carefully, afraid to cause her even the slightest pain, trying to be a support and protection so that she felt safe and understood that she could count on him. Suddenly, Lin began to slowly awaken, her eyelids gradually opening, and she carefully returned to awareness of the world around her, filled with new sensations and thoughts, as if waking up after a long and restful sleep. Fjord smiled in surprise when he saw her awakening, for he had thought that the girl was already fast asleep, and a spark of joy sparkled in his heart when he saw that she was returning to life again and was ready to greet a new day with them. With a slight smile, filled with calm and gentle confidence, Lian replied that first it was necessary to take care of business and prepare for the day, and then allow herself to rest, greeting the new dawn with joy and warmth in her heart, as if greeting it from her bed. She stretched slowly on the bed, extending her arms up and straightening her shoulders, enjoying the moment of lightness and peace, as if preparing for a new day filled with opportunities and interesting events that were just beginning to unfold around her. The blonde himself, feeling a little embarrassed and constrained, covered his mouth with his hand, trying to hide a slight smile that treacherously betrayed his growing feelings, because it seemed that he too was gradually beginning to fall in love with the one who was next to him so sincerely and naturally. Lian, as if not noticing what was happening around her, slowly fidgeted in place, looking intently to the side, immersed in her thoughts and dreams, which were at once bright and mysterious, hiding her most tender feelings and